The stone beneath your hands has been mortared by 5 generations of the millstone family. Yet the kingdom whose taxes you pay has never sent protection when the bandits come. In the fertile fields of Westfall, 3 miles south of Sentinel Hill, where the militia keeps their inadequate watch, there stands a cottage measuring 15 feet by 12 feet by 8 feet high. Within these dimensions, a family of 4 has lived for 11 years. The walls are fieldstone quarried from the hills where gnolls now make their camps. The thatch needs replacing. This is the story of Gareth Millstone, farmer, age 34, husband to Ilara, father to Thomas and Sarah, and what home means when the world beyond your door wants you dead. His grandfather built this cottage 63 years ago with stones carried by hand from the quarry 2 miles distant. Each stone was selected for its shape and weight, fitted together with mortar mixed from river clay and lime purchased at considerable expense from the merchants in Moonbrook before that town fell to the Defiers Brotherhood. The walls rise 7 feet before meeting the roof supports, thick enough to provide some protection against arrows and thrown weapons, though not thick enough to stop a determined assault by organized bandits. The mortar between the stones shows cracks in places where winter frost has worked its patient destruction, and each spring, Gareth must spend several days repointing the joints with fresh mixture to prevent water infiltration that would eventually compromise the entire structure. The stone beneath your hands has been mortared by 5 generations of the Millstone family. Yet the kingdom whose taxes you pay has never sent protection when the bandits come. In the fertile fields of Westfall, 3 miles south of Sentinel Hill, where the militia keeps their inadequate watch, there stands a cottage measuring 15 feet by 12 feet by 8 feet high. Within these dimensions, a family of 4 has lived for 11 years. The walls are fieldstone quarried from the hills where gnolls now make their camps. The thatch needs replacing. This is the story of Gareth Millstone, farmer, age 34, husband to Ilara, father to Thomas and Sarah, and what home means when the world beyond your door wants you dead. His grandfather built this cottage 63 years ago, with stones carried by hand from the quarry 2 miles distant. Each stone was selected for its shape and weight, fitted together with mortar mixed from river clay and lime purchased at considerable expense from the merchants in Moonbrook before that town fell to the Defiers Brotherhood. The walls rise 7 feet before meeting the roof supports, thick enough to provide some protection against arrows and thrown weapons, though not thick enough to stop a determined assault by organized bandits. The mortar between the stones shows cracks in places where winter frost has worked its patient destruction, and each spring Gareth must spend several days repointing the joints with fresh mixture to prevent water infiltration that would eventually compromise the entire structure. The cottage faces south to capture what sunlight Westfall's frequently overcast skies permit. The orientation was not chosen for comfort, but for practical agricultural reasons. South-facing windows, even without glass, allow maximum light penetration during the short winter days when work must sometimes be done indoors. The front door is constructed from oak planks, 3 inches thick, harvested from the forest that once covered much of Westfall before generations of farmers cleared the land for cultivation. The door hangs on iron hinges forged by Marcus Steelgrave, the blacksmith who maintained his shop in Moonbrook until the Defiers seized the town 8 years ago. Steelgrave is dead now, killed during the initial uprising, and his craft has died with him. When these hinges fail, Gareth will have no easy way to replace them. The door can be barred from inside with a heavy wooden beam that rests in iron brackets mounted on either side of the frame. The beam is oak like the door, nearly as old, worn smooth by decades of being lifted into place each night. During the day, the beam leans against the wall beside the door, ready to be deployed at the first sign of danger. 5 years ago, when the Defiers came in the night, The beam was not in place because Gareth had been working in the fields until after dark and had fallen asleep before securing it properly. This lapse cost him a scar that runs from his right temple to his jawline, cost his family their winter grain stores, and cost him the peace of mind he will never recover. The beam has not been forgotten since that night. 2 windows break the cottage's walls, one facing south beside the door, one facing east toward the rising sun. Neither window contains glass. Glass is a luxury reserved for merchants and the few remaining nobility who have not fled Westfall's deteriorating security situation. Instead, the windows are covered by wooden shutters that can be closed and latched from inside. The shutters are made from the same oak as the door, though thinner, only an inch thick, sufficient to keep out weather and provide some security against casual intrusion, but useless against determined assault. During summer months, the shutters remain open during daylight hours to provide ventilation and light. During winter, they stay closed except for brief periods when the smoke from the cooking fire grows too thick to breathe comfortably. The roof consists of wheat straw thatch laid over a framework of wooden beams. The beams themselves are pine, purchased as rough-cut lumber from a mill that operated near Sentinel Hill until 3 years ago when the miller was killed by gnolls and his family fled to Stormwind. The thatch must be replaced every 3 years to prevent water leakage that would rot the underlying beams and eventually cause structural collapse. Replacement requires approximately 2 weeks of work during the late summer after the wheat harvest, when dry straw is available and weather conditions permit outdoor labor. Gareth performs this work himself with assistance from Thomas and occasionally from neighbor Darrick Broxton, whose farm lies 200 yards to the north. The labor is exhausting and dangerous, working on the sloped roof in heat that radiates from the sun-warmed thatch. But the alternative is living beneath a roof that leaks and eventually fails. The thatch currently in place was installed 2 years ago and shows signs of wear that suggest it may need replacement sooner than the typical 3-year cycle. Several sections have been damaged by crows that nest in the nearby trees and pull at the straw to extract insects and grubs. Other sections show thinning where wind has worked individual straws loose over time. Gareth has made temporary repairs using spare straw kept in a small shed behind the cottage, but temporary repairs only delay the inevitable. Next summer, if he survives that long, if his family survives, if the Defiers do not burn the cottage, or the gnolls do not kill him in his fields, he will need to rethatch the entire roof. A small garden occupies the ground immediately adjacent to the cottage's east wall. The garden measures approximately 10 feet by 6 feet and produces vegetables that supplement the family's diet of grain and occasional meat. Ilara tends this garden with care that borders on obsession, because the vegetables it produces may mean the difference between adequate nutrition and the slow starvation that claims families throughout Westfall during difficult years. The garden currently contains turnips, carrots, cabbage, and onions, planted in rows that follow traditional spacing passed down through generations of farmers who learned through bitter experience exactly how much space each plant requires to produce optimal yield in Westfall's moderately fertile soil. The well that provides the family's water lies 40 paces from the front door, measured by Gareth's stride, positioned at the center point between his cottage and the 3 neighboring farms with which he shares its use. The well was dug by communal labor 17 years ago, before Gareth married Ilara, when his father still lived and coordinated such projects with the neighbors. It descends 32 feet through soil and clay before reaching the water table that flows beneath this section of Westfall. The well's walls are lined with stones to prevent collapse, and a wooden frame supports a simple pulley system that makes raising the bucket less arduous than it would be with rope alone. Nevertheless, drawing water remains heavy labor, and Ilara makes the journey 6 or 7 times each day, carrying 2 wooden buckets that hold approximately 3 gallons each when full. The shared well represents both cooperation and potential conflict. The 4 families who use it have agreed to maintain it jointly, contributing labor and materials as needed to keep it functional. They have also agreed to ration usage during dry periods when the water level drops and conservation becomes necessary. These agreements work most of the time because all 4 families understand that the well's failure would be catastrophic for everyone. But during the worst droughts, when the water level drops to dangerous levels and children are crying from thirst, tensions rise. 3 years ago, Gareth discovered that the Henderson family from the farm to the south had been drawing water during the night in violation of the rationing agreement. The confrontation that followed nearly resulted in violence before Derek Broxton mediated a resolution. The incident has not been forgotten. Trust, once damaged, repairs slowly if at all. The cottage's exterior shows evidence of its history in ways that only close examination reveals. The eastern wall bears scorch marks at its base from a fire that occurred 9 years ago when sparks from a cooking accident ignited the dry grass that grew against the foundation. Gareth's father extinguished the fire before it could spread to the thatch, but the stones retain the black staining that no amount of scrubbing can remove. The northern wall shows a section where the stonework differs slightly from the rest. Stones of a different color and slightly different size, filling an area approximately 4 feet wide and 5 feet high. This section was rebuilt after the Defias raid 5 years ago, when the attackers broke through the wall rather than attempting to force the barred door. The repair work was done quickly, using whatever stones could be gathered locally, and the aesthetic mismatch is permanent. The ground around the cottage has been deliberately cleared of vegetation for a distance of approximately 20 feet in all directions. This clearing serves multiple purposes. It eliminates hiding places for potential attackers approaching the cottage. It reduces fire risk by creating a buffer between the building and dry grass or brush that might ignite during summer months. It allows Gareth to see anyone approaching from any direction, providing precious seconds of warning that might mean the difference between successful defense and disaster. Maintaining this cleared area requires regular labor, cutting grass and weeds that constantly attempt to reclaim the space, pulling up saplings that sprout from seeds carried by wind or deposited by birds. The work is tedious but essential, another item on the endless list of tasks required for survival. A small outbuilding stands 30 feet behind the cottage, constructed with less care than the main dwelling. This shed measures approximately 8 feet square and 6 feet high at its peak, built from scrap lumber and roofed with wooden planks rather than thatch. The shed serves as storage for items that need protection from weather, but are not valuable enough or used frequently enough to keep inside the cottage. Currently, it contains spare thatch for roof repairs, additional firewood being seasoned for future use, tools that are used seasonally, and various materials accumulated over years that might someday prove useful. The shed's door hangs crookedly on leather hinges, and its roof leaks in several places, but it serves its purpose adequately. Gareth has considered rebuilding it properly, but cannot justify the time and resources when so many more critical tasks demand attention. Inside the cottage, the single room contains everything the family owns and everything their lives require. The floor is packed earth covered with a layer of straw that is replaced 4 times yearly when it becomes too soiled and compressed to serve its purpose. The straw provides minimal insulation against the cold that radiates from the ground during winter months and offers slight cushioning for feet that spend most of their waking hours working. The floor's eastern section, nearest the door and furthest from the hearth, serves as the sleeping area. Here, 2 wooden bed frames support mattresses stuffed with more straw and covered with rough wool fabric. The frames were built by Gareth's grandfather using techniques passed down from his father, joined with wooden pegs rather than metal nails, which were too expensive for everyday use. One bed frame is larger, measuring approximately 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, and belongs to Gareth and Ilara. The other is smaller, measuring 5 feet long and 3 feet wide, and is shared by Thomas and Sarah. The children's bed is becoming inadequate as Thomas grows toward manhood, but constructing a third bed would require lumber the family cannot afford and would consume floor space the cottage cannot spare. Soon, within a year or two, Thomas will need to sleep on the floor, or arrangements will need to be made for him to sleep in the shed, or he will be conscripted into military service, and the problem will resolve itself through his absence or death. These possibilities are not discussed openly, but all family members understand them. The mattresses are lumpy and uncomfortable by any objective standard, but they represent luxury compared to sleeping directly on the ground or on bare wooden planks. The straw filling must be replaced twice yearly when it becomes compressed and begins to rot from the moisture of sleeping bodies. The wool covers have been patched repeatedly, and several sections are more patched than original fabric. Ilara washes these covers 4 times yearly, carrying them to the stream that runs half a mile to the east, scrubbing them with harsh soap made from animal fat and lye, spreading them on rocks to dry in whatever sunlight is available. This task requires an entire day's labor and leaves her hands raw and aching. The family owns 4 blankets, distributed 2 per bed. The blankets are woven wool, gray and brown in color, because dye is an expensive luxury that serves no practical purpose. The wool was purchased from a neighbor who raises sheep, then spun and woven by Ilara over the course of 2 years, working by firelight during winter evenings when other tasks did not demand her attention. Each blanket represents approximately 80 hours of labor, and their value to the family exceeds their warmth, though that warmth is considerable. During the coldest winter nights, when frost forms on the inside of the cottage walls and breath becomes visible in the dim interior, the entire family sometimes sleeps in the larger bed, sharing body heat and blankets in a configuration that provides survival if not comfort. The cottage's western wall is dominated by the hearth, the most critical feature of the dwelling. The hearth is constructed from stones similar to those used in the walls, fitted together to create a firebox approximately 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 3 feet high. The hearth sits directly on the cottage floor, and a simple stone chimney rises through the roof to vent smoke outside. The chimney draws adequately most of the time, but when wind blows from certain directions, or when the thatch becomes damp from rain, smoke backs up into the cottage's interior, filling the single room with acrid haze that burns eyes and lungs. This is accepted as normal, one of many discomforts that define daily existence. The hearth serves multiple essential functions. It provides heat during cold months, without which the family would likely freeze to death during Westfall's harsh winters. It provides light during evening hours, supplementing the inadequate illumination from expensive candles that are burned only when absolutely necessary. It provides the fire required for cooking, transforming raw ingredients into edible meals. It provides psychological comfort, a focal point for family gathering, a symbol of home that humans have recognized for thousands of years of civilization. The hearth fire is never completely extinguished. Allowing it to die would require relighting it, a process that consumes flint, steel, and tinder that are difficult to replace. Instead, the fire is banked each night, covered with ash that slows combustion while preserving coals that can be coaxed back to flame in the morning. The cooking equipment consists of a single large iron pot, 3 wooden bowls, 4 wooden spoons, 2 iron knives, and an iron cooking fork. The pot is the family's most valuable possession after Gareth's farming tools. It measures approximately 14 inches in diameter and 10 inches deep, made from cast iron that was forged decades ago when skilled metalworkers still operated throughout Westfall. The pot hangs from an iron hook attached to a wooden beam that extends horizontally above the hearth. The height of the pot can be adjusted by changing which link of the supporting chain rests on the hook, allowing some control over cooking temperature. The pot bears no decoration, no maker's mark, nothing to distinguish it from thousands of similar pots produced across human kingdoms. It is simply functional, and its function is essential. The wooden bowls and spoons were carved by Gareth's father during winter evenings, using techniques he learned from his own father. The wood is local oak, chosen for its hardness and durability. Each bowl bears the marks of its carving, knife cuts that were never smoothed away, because smoothness serves no purpose in a tool meant for eating porridge and stew. The bowls have developed a patina from years of use, a dark sheen from the oils of countless meals and countless hands. One bowl has a crack running from rim to base, repaired with a metal staple to prevent complete separation. This bowl is Gareth's. He refuses to discard it despite the crack, because it was carved by his father's hands and represents continuity across generations. The iron knives are utilitarian tools used for cutting food, cutting cloth, cutting rope, and whatever other cutting tasks arise. One knife is larger, approximately 8 inches long, including handle, with a blade that has been sharpened so many times that it has developed a pronounced curve. The other is smaller, perhaps 5 inches long, and is kept sharper than the larger knife because it is used for more delicate work. Both knives are valuable enough that they are never left outside and are stored carefully to prevent rust. Iron is precious in a region where working smiths no longer exist, and replacement tools must be purchased at exploitative prices from merchants who travel, from Stormwind with armed escorts. A wooden table occupies the center of the cottage's floor space, positioned to allow access from all sides. The table measures approximately 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, constructed from rough planks nailed to a simple frame. The surface is scarred and stained from years of use, marked with knife cuts, burns from hot pots placed carelessly, and darker stains from spilled food and blood from butchered animals. 3 three-legged stools provide seating at the table. 3-legged stools are more stable than 4-legged chairs on the cottage's uneven floor, and they are easier to construct with minimal woodworking skill. The 4th family member, typically Sarah as the youngest, sits on a section of log that serves as an improvised stool. Someday, when resources permit, Gareth intends to build a 4th proper stool. That day has not yet arrived, and likely will not arrive soon. Storage within the cottage is provided by rough wooden shelves mounted on the walls and by clay pots arranged beneath the shelves. The shelves hold the family's small supply of preserved foods, cooking implements, and personal items. The clay pots contain grain, dried beans, and other staples that must be protected from mice and insects that constantly seek to infiltrate the cottage. The pots are sealed with wooden lids tied down with cord, and even this protection is not always adequate. Gareth has found evidence of mice gnawing through the cords and stealing grain, and he has killed dozens of the creatures over the years using simple traps and his bare hands. The mice are persistent and numerous, and the war against them never ends. From the rafters that support the roof hang various items that need to dry or cure. Currently, several bundles of herbs collected by Alara dangle from the beams, their leaves slowly desiccating in the smoke and heat from the hearth. These herbs will be used for cooking and for treating minor illnesses, according to folk wisdom passed down through generations. Also hanging from the rafters are 3 strips of salted pork, the remains of a pig that Gareth purchased 4 months ago and butchered himself. The meat will last another 2 months if properly preserved, providing occasional protein supplements to the family's grain-heavy diet. The strips hang high enough that the family must stand on the table to reach them, a precaution against children sneaking food between meals and against mice that might somehow climb the walls. A small wooden chest sits against the cottage's southern wall. its lid secured with an iron lock. This chest contains the family's documents, meager valuables, and items of sentimental importance. The documents include Gareth's deed to the land, a parchment bearing multiple stamps and signatures that prove his legal right to farm these acres and occupy this cottage. The deed was issued by Stormwind's government during the period of rebuilding after the Second War, when the kingdom attempted to restore normal civil administration to territories devastated by conflict. Also in the chest are the marriage certificate documenting Gareth and Ilara's union, birth records for Thomas and Sarah, and the death certificates for Gareth's parents. These documents are nearly worthless in practical terms, since no one in Westfall has the authority or inclination to enforce them, but they represent official recognition of the family's existence and rights. The chest also contains a few silver coins, 12 in total, representing the family's entire monetary savings. The coins bear the stamp of Stormwind, showing the kingdom's seal on one side and various denominations on the other. 12 silver coins represents approximately 1 month's income if the family were to sell everything they could spare from a good harvest. It represents catastrophe insurance, money that could purchase emergency supplies or pay bribes or secure passage away from Westfall if circumstances became completely untenable. The coins are counted monthly by Gareth, a ritual that provides small reassurance that some reserve exists, however inadequate, against total destitution. Personal possessions beyond those already described are minimal. Each family member owns 2 sets of clothing, one for work and one for church or market visits. The work clothing consists of rough woolen tunics and trousers for the males, woolen dresses for the females. The fabric is undyed, colored in shades of gray and brown by the natural wool. The good clothing is similar but slightly less worn, mended more carefully, reserved for occasions when appearance matters. Footwear consists of leather shoes for adults and wooden clogs for children. The leather shoes belong to Gareth's parents and are repaired endlessly to extend their life. The clogs are carved from single pieces of wood and are uncomfortable but durable. During summer months, the entire family goes barefoot to preserve the footwear for seasons when protection against cold and moisture is essential for survival. Ilara owns a wooden comb with which she maintains her hair and the children's hair. The comb is old, its teeth worn and a few broken, but it functions adequately. She also owns a small mirror, a piece of polished metal approximately 3 inches across, with which she can examine her face when necessary. The mirror was a wedding gift from her mother and is one of her few possessions that has no practical utility beyond vanity, which makes it precious. Gareth owns a whetstone for sharpening his tools and weapons, a leather strop for finishing blade edges, and a small container of oil for preventing rust on metal implements. These items are tools rather than possessions, essential equipment for maintaining the family's ability to work and defend themselves. The children own almost nothing beyond their clothing. Thomas has a small knife, given to him on his 10th birthday, with which he practices carving and performs minor tasks. Sarah has a corn husk doll that Ilara made for her 3 years ago, a simple toy that represents childhood in a household where childhood must end early. The doll is worn and faded, its features barely distinguishable, but Sarah still keeps it and occasionally plays with it when time permits and when she thinks no one is watching. She understands, as all peasant children understand, that attachment to toys must be abandoned as adult responsibilities accumulate. Against the cottage's northern wall stands a small shrine to the Holy Light. The shrine consists of a wooden shelf mounted at shoulder height, upon which rests a single white candle and a simple wooden symbol carved in the shape traditionally associated with the Light's church. The candle is lit during morning and evening prayers and on holy days recognized by the church calendar. The candle currently in place is nearly exhausted, burned down to a stub that will last perhaps 3 more days before requiring replacement. Candles are purchased at considerable expense from traveling merchants, or occasionally received as gifts from Brother Malthus, the priest who travels a circuit through Westfall's farms, bringing religious services to communities too poor and too endangered to maintain permanent churches. The shrine represents the family's faith, which is genuine though practical. They believe in the light's teachings about duty, community, and the promise of peace after death. They believe that righteous living will be rewarded, if not in this world then, in whatever comes after. They pray for protection against the dangers that surround them, for adequate harvests, for their children's survival. Their faith is not intellectual or particularly devout by the standards of professional clergy, but it is real, and it provides structure to their lives. The morning prayer asks for strength to face the day's work. The evening prayer expresses gratitude for surviving another day. These rituals cost nothing and provide psychological benefits that are difficult to quantify, but impossible to dismiss. The cottage's interior is dim even during daylight hours when shutters are open. The two small windows admit limited sunlight, and that light must compete with shadows cast by the furniture and the general gloom of a structure designed for shelter rather than illumination. At night, when shutters are closed and the family relies on firelight for visibility, the interior becomes a world of shifting shadows and uncertain shapes. The hearth provides enough light to see immediate surroundings, but leaves the corners of the room in darkness that could conceal anything. This darkness is unnerving, particularly for the children, but candles are too expensive to burn for comfort. The family has learned to function in semi-darkness, moving through familiar space by memory, accepting the discomfort as they accept so many other discomforts. The cottage smells of wood smoke primarily, a scent that permeates everything, that can never be eliminated or even reduced. The smoke has stained the rafters black and left a sooty residue on every surface. The family's clothing, their hair, their skin, all carry the smell of smoke constantly. They do not notice it because it is omnipresent, but anyone entering from outside would immediately identify the smoke scent as the cottage's defining olfactory characteristic. Beneath the smoke are other smells, less pleasant. Unwashed bodies contribute their own odor, since bathing is infrequent due to the labor required to heat sufficient water. Cooking smells linger, particularly the smell of boiled turnips and cabbage, which Alara prepares frequently because those vegetables keep well and grow reliably in her garden. The earthen floor contributes a smell of damp soil, and the straw covering the floor adds its own vegetable scent as it slowly decomposes under the traffic of human feet. The cottage is cold during winter and hot during summer, and neither condition can be adequately addressed. During winter months, the hearth fire provides warmth in the immediate area around the fireplace, but does little to heat the rest of the single room. The cottage's eastern corner, farthest from the hearth and closest to the door, remains perpetually cold. Frost sometimes forms on the interior walls during the coldest nights, and the family's breath becomes visible as they sleep beneath inadequate blankets. During summer, the cottage becomes stifling, its thick stone walls and thatch roof trapping heat that has nowhere to escape. Opening the shutters provides minimal relief, since no breeze penetrates the still summer air. The family spends summer days working outside and uses the cottage primarily for sleeping and for escaping the midday sun during brief rest periods. The cottage is loud with the sounds of family life and disturbing in its silences. During waking hours, the sounds of cooking, conversation, children moving, Gareth maintaining his tools create a continuous low-level noise that fills the space. The hearth fire crackles and pops. The iron pot occasionally clanks against its supporting chain. Footsteps on the earthen floor create soft thuds. Mice scrabble in the walls and ceiling. These sounds are familiar and therefore comforting, evidence that life continues normally. The disturbing sounds come from outside. Wind rattling the shutters, rain hammering on the thatch roof, animal calls in the darkness, some identifiable as livestock or familiar wildlife, others unknown and therefore threatening, human voices in the distance, neighbor families or travelers or possibly bandits. Every unexpected sound must be evaluated for threat level, decided upon, responded to or dismissed. This constant evaluation is exhausting but essential. The silence is worse than the noise. When the cottage falls completely silent, when no sound comes from inside or outside, when even the mice seem to pause in their constant activity, the silence feels wrong. It suggests that something is listening, that some predator has caused all other creatures to freeze in fear. The silence rarely lasts long before normal sounds resume, but during those moments of complete quiet, the family holds still, barely breathing, waiting to discover whether the silence heralds danger or is simply coincidence. This cottage is not comfortable by any definition of that word. It is cold in winter and hot in summer. It is dark and smoky. It smells of unwashed humanity and boiled vegetables. Its floor is dirt, its furniture crude, its possessions minimal. It offers no privacy, no space for individual solitude, no separation between the functions of sleeping, cooking, eating, and living. 4 human beings occupy a space that measures 180 square feet, approximately 45 square feet per person, less than many peoples in more fortunate regions allocate to their livestock. The cottage's amenities would be considered primitive in Stormwind's poorest neighborhoods, intolerable in its middle-class districts, incomprehensible to its nobility. But this cottage represents wealth by Westfall's current standards. Gareth owns this land and this structure outright, documented by deed and recognized by his neighbors. He is not a tenant farmer working someone else's land and paying rent that consumes half his harvest. He is not a refugee, squatting in an abandoned building with no legal right to occupy the space. He has walls that keep out most weather and most animals. He has a roof that sheds water adequately. He has a hearth that provides heat and cooking fire. He has a door that bars and windows that close. His children sleep under a roof rather than under the stars. His wife has a cooking pot and storage for food. These things represent success, however modest, in a region where failure means death and success means surviving until the next crisis. The cottage has witnessed 5 generations of the Millstone family. Gareth's great-grandfather died of plague in this room, or in the previous cottage that stood on this site before being destroyed during the First War. His grandfather rebuilt here after the war ended, choosing to return to land his family had farmed for generations, rather than starting over elsewhere. His father defended this cottage against orc raiders during the Second War, survived that conflict, raised his son here, taught him farming here, died here. Gareth was born in this cottage, delivered by a midwife who has since been killed by the Defias. He married Elara and brought her here to begin their life together. His children were born in this room, on that same bed where he and Elara sleep. One daughter who did not survive was buried behind the cottage, in ground that the family considers consecrated by her presence. This cottage contains memory, though the memory is not preserved in written records or physical monuments, but in the minds of those who live here and in the stories they tell. Gareth can point to the spot near the hearth where his father taught him to sharpen a blade, the patient instruction about angle and pressure and testing the edge. He can identify the section of floor where Thomas took his first steps, the joy of watching his son achieve that milestone of development. He can show the mark on the door frame where he measured the children's height each year on their birthdays, scratches in the wood that document their growth. These memories are intangible wealth, worth nothing in any market but everything to the family that holds them. This cottage is vulnerable in ways that its occupants understand without illusion. The Defias could burn it in minutes if they chose to target it specifically. Gnolls could overwhelm its minimal defenses through simple numerical superiority. A determined assault by even 3 or 4 trained soldiers would succeed, since Gareth is only one man and his son is still a child. The stone walls would not stop a military force with siege equipment or even simple battering rams. The barred door would delay but not prevent entry. The entire structure could be demolished in an afternoon by work crew with proper tools. What protects this cottage is not its strength, but its insignificance. It is one of hundreds of similar cottages scattered across Westfall. It contains nothing worth stealing beyond the family's meager possessions. Its destruction would accomplish nothing strategic. It survives because it is too unimportant to be worth destroying, and that survival depends entirely on remaining unimportant. This cottage represents continuity across generations, but that continuity is threatened and may not extend to the next generation. Thomas will inherit this land if he survives to inherit anything, if the family holds the land through the coming years, if Westfall itself survives as a functioning agricultural region. But Thomas may be conscripted and killed in some distant war, or he may flee Westfall's deteriorating conditions, or he may join the Defiers as some desperate farmers have, or he may simply die from disease or accident or violence, leaving no heir to continue the Millstone family's presence on this land. Sarah will not inherit because daughters do not inherit land in human custom. She will marry and join her husband's household if she survives to marrying age, if a suitable match can be arranged, if circumstances permit normal life events to occur. The cottage's future is uncertain, as is the future of everyone within it. Westfall is collapsing under pressure from multiple threats that the kingdom makes no serious attempt to address. The Defiers grow stronger rather than weaker. The Gnoll tribes become more aggressive as human settlements weaken. Refugees flow into the region from other troubled areas, straining resources that are already inadequate. The social order that once provided some stability has fractured, leaving individual families to fend for themselves with minimal support from authorities who are either absent or ineffective. Many cottages similar to this one now stand empty, their occupants fled or dead, their roofs collapsing, their walls returning to the stone and mortar from which they were built. But tonight the cottage stands, its hearth fire burns, its door is barred, its occupants are alive. Tomorrow morning the sun will rise over Westfall's fields, and Gareth will unbar the door and step outside to begin another day of work. The cottage will serve its purpose for another day, providing shelter and a place to return to when work ends. How many more days it will serve that purpose cannot be known. The family does not speak of this uncertainty because speaking of it would change nothing. They simply continue, performing the daily rituals of survival, maintaining the structure that houses their lives, hoping that continuation will prove sufficient to carry them through whatever challenges arrive next. The day begins before dawn, though no clock marks the hour. Gareth wakes to darkness that differs only subtly from the darkness of deep night, a barely perceptible lightening of the black that fills the cottage interior. This ability to sense dawn's approach was learned during childhood, taught by a father who himself learned it from his father, a skill passed through generations of farmers whose survival depends on maximizing daylight hours. Ilara wakes moments after Gareth, her sleep similarly attuned to the rhythms of agricultural life. The children remain asleep, their breathing audible in the cottage's stillness, exhausted bodies taking what rest they can before another day of labor begins. Gareth rises from the bed without speaking. Speech is unnecessary and would waste the energy required to form words. He moves carefully in the darkness, navigating by memory around the table, past the hearth where last night's banked fire preserves coals beneath their ash covering. His first task is to revive the fire, adding small pieces of kindling to the coals, blowing gently to encourage flame. The kindling catches after several breaths, small flames spreading across the dry wood, illuminating the hearth area with flickering orange light. He adds larger pieces of wood once the kindling burns steadily, building the fire to a size that will provide cooking heat and warming the cottage's interior against the morning chill that makes breath visible even indoors during autumn months. Ilara joins him at the hearth, still wearing the same dress she slept in, because removing clothing at night wastes time in the morning and provides negligible comfort improvement. She fills the iron pot with water from a bucket drawn the previous evening, hangs the pot from its hook above the fire, begins preparing the morning meal. The water will take approximately 30 minutes to reach a temperature suitable for cooking porridge, time that cannot be hurried regardless of hunger or other demands. While the water heats, Gareth performs his morning inspection of the cottage perimeter, a ritual that has become automatic after years of practice. He unbars the door and steps outside into air that is cold enough to make him shiver, despite the wool tunic that serves as his only protection against weather. The sky shows grey rather than black, the sun still below the horizon but approaching. Gareth walks the cleared space around the cottage, looking for tracks in the damp earth, evidence of nighttime visitors. He finds deer tracks 40 feet from the door, a doe and fawn based on the size variation, harmless herbivores that pose no threat. He finds mouse tracks near the shed, suggesting that the creatures have found a way inside despite his attempts to seal every gap. He finds no human tracks, no gnoll tracks, no signs of predators or bandits. This absence of threat is the best outcome he can hope for, though the absence is not the same as safety. Threats that leave no tracks are often the most dangerous. The inspection complete, Gareth checks the well during his circuit back to the cottage. He lowers the bucket, hears it splash when it reaches water, pulls it up to verify the water level remains adequate. The well is functioning normally, no signs of contamination or unusual lowering that would indicate drought conditions. He empties the bucket back into the well rather than carrying water to the cottage, because Ilara will fetch fresh water later, and water is heavy enough without carrying it unnecessarily. The small stones around the well's opening show signs of erosion, mortar crumbling in several places. This deterioration will eventually require repair, adding another item to the list of maintenance tasks that never ends. He returns to the cottage as light increases toward what passes for dawn during Westfall's frequently overcast autumn. Inside, Ilara has added oats to the now boiling water, stirring the mixture with a wooden spoon to prevent sticking. The oats will cook for approximately 20 minutes, transforming from individual grains into thick porridge that will fill stomachs and provide energy for the morning's work. She adds a small pinch of salt from the clay pot where the family's precious salt supply is stored, measuring carefully because salt costs 3 silver coins per pound and must last through winter. She considers adding dried berries from another pot, but decides against it because the berries are limited and must be rationed. The children wake during this preparation, roused by the sounds of cooking and by the smoke that now fills the cottage as the fire burns more actively. Thomas rises immediately when called, understanding that delay means cold food and wasted time. At 12 years old, he has absorbed the lesson that survival requires discipline and that childhood luxuries like sleeping late cannot be afforded. He dresses quickly, pulling on the wool trousers and tunic that he wore yesterday, and will wear again tomorrow and every day until they become so worn that Ilara must spend precious time mending them, or, in the worst case, replacing them with new clothing that the family cannot easily afford. Sarah wakes more slowly, rubbing her eyes, 7 years old, and still young enough that she is occasionally allowed to show reluctance about beginning another day. But even she understands that showing reluctance does not mean she is excused from her responsibilities. Morning ablutions are brief and minimal. Each family member splashes cold water from a bucket onto face and hands, the shock of cold water serving to complete the waking process. They dry themselves with a shared cloth that hangs near the hearth, rough fabric that absorbs moisture adequately if not gently. Gareth runs wet hands through his hair, smoothing it as much as possible without benefit of comb or mirror. He does not shave because shaving requires heated water, sharp blade, and time that the morning does not contain. His beard grows unattended, trimmed occasionally when it becomes long enough to interfere with work. Ilara combs her hair with the wooden comb, working out tangles that have formed during sleep, braiding it into a simple plait that will keep it away from her face during the day's labor. The family gathers at the table as Ilara portions the porridge into 4 wooden bowls. The portions are not equal. Gareth receives the largest serving because his fieldwork demands the most physical energy. Ilara receives the second largest because her daily labor, though different from Gareth's, is equally exhausting. Thomas receives a portion nearly equal to his mother's because he now works alongside his father and needs fuel for growing muscles. Sarah receives the smallest portion, appropriate for her age and lighter workload, though her portion is still sufficient to prevent hunger during the morning hours. This distribution is not discussed or questioned. Everyone understands the logic of allocating calories according to energy expenditure. The porridge is eaten with wooden spoons, each person focused on consuming the meal efficiently rather than savoring taste that is barely distinguishable from yesterday's porridge and identical to tomorrow's. The oats provide texture and bulk. The salt provides minimal flavor. The temperature provides comfort in the cold morning. These are the meal's only qualities, and they are sufficient for their purpose. No one speaks during eating because conversation distracts from consumption and allows food to cool faster. The only sounds are spoons scraping bowls and the occasional swallow. The meal is finished in less than 10 minutes, bowls emptied completely because wasting food is unthinkable. After breakfast, Gareth and Thomas prepare for fieldwork. Gareth straps on the leather belt that holds his sheathed sword, a weapon that is rusty and old but sharp and functional. The sword belonged to his father and was used during the Second War when his father served in the militia. The weapon is not decorative. Farmers working in fields distant from their homes are vulnerable to attack, and a weapon provides minimal defense that is better than no defense. Gareth has killed 2 men with this sword, both defiant bandits who attacked him 3 years ago while he worked alone. He does not speak of these killings, but he cleans and sharpens the weapon regularly, understanding that the next attack could come at any moment. Thomas carries a long knife rather than a sword, the knife given to him 2 years ago when he began full-time fieldwork. The knife serves as both tool and weapon, useful for cutting rope, trimming plants, and defending himself if necessary. The boy has not yet killed anyone, but Gareth has taught him the mechanics of stabbing and slashing, the same instruction that fathers throughout Westfall provide to sons, because children who cannot fight are children who will not survive. These lessons are delivered in the fields during breaks from work, practical instruction using sticks as practice weapons. Thomas is not naturally violent, but he is learning to be capable of violence, which is different and necessary. The farming tools are collected from where they lean against the cottage wall. Gareth takes the hoe, its iron blade worn thin from years of use, its wooden handle smooth from the oils of his hands and his father's hands before him. Thomas takes the rake, lighter than the hoe, but still substantial enough to require both hands. The tools are inspected briefly for damage or loosening of the blade attachments. Finding nothing requiring immediate repair, father and son walk toward the fields that lie east of the cottage, land that has been worked by millstone men for 4 generations. The fields cover 3 acres, divided into sections based on what crops grow in each area. The largest section, approximately 2 acres, is devoted to wheat, the primary cash crop that will be sold or traded after harvest. Another half acre grows barley for the family's own consumption, and for making the weak ale that serves as daily beverage when water quality is questionable. The remaining half-acre is split between turnips, cabbage, and other vegetables that supplement the family's diet. This distribution represents careful calculation of what the family needs to eat versus what they need to sell to acquire goods they cannot produce themselves. The wheat is currently in its growing phase, stalks approximately 2 feet high, requiring weeding to prevent competition from unwanted plants that would steal moisture and nutrients from the soil. This weeding is endless work, bending to pull plants by hand or chopping them with the hoe, working row by row across the field. The work is back-breaking in the most literal sense, requiring hours of bending that leave the lower back screaming with pain. Gareth's back has hurt constantly for 15 years, a dull ache that never completely disappears and sharpens to agony during extended bending. He mentions this pain to no one because complaining changes nothing. The weeding must be done regardless of pain. Gareth and Thomas work side by side, moving slowly down adjacent rows, pulling weeds, chopping with the hoe when pulling is insufficient. The pace is steady rather than fast, because the work will continue for hours, and exhausting oneself early leads to decreased efficiency later. The sun rises as they work, climbing above the horizon, though remaining hidden behind clouds that perpetually cover Westfall's skies. The temperature rises slightly, though autumn mornings remain cool. Sweat begins to appear on Gareth's forehead after an hour of work, moisture that drips occasionally into his eyes, stinging with salt. He wipes his face with his sleeve and continues working. The fields are not empty of other life. Crows circle overhead, calling to each other, searching for insects and seeds. The birds are numerous and bold, occasionally landing near the workers to investigate disturbed soil. Gareth tolerates them because they eat some of the insects that would otherwise damage crops, but he throws stones at any crow that approaches too closely. Mice and voles live in the field borders, creating small burrows from which they emerge to steal grain. These rodents are a constant problem, and Gareth kills them when opportunity permits, crushing them with his hoe or with stones. The mice breed faster than he can kill them, but reducing their numbers by even a small percentage means more grain remains for human consumption. While Gareth and Thomas work in the fields, Ilara begins her own labor routine. Her first task after the men depart is to fetch water from the shared well. She carries 2 wooden buckets, each capable of holding approximately 3 gallons when filled. The walk to the well and back covers 80 paces, and she will make this journey 6 or 7 times today, carrying approximately 40 gallons of water total. The weight of a full bucket is perhaps 25 pounds, requiring both hands and causing arms to ache after the first trip. By the 7th trip, her shoulders and back join the protest, muscles strained past comfort into the realm of endurance. The water serves multiple purposes. Some is reserved for drinking, stored in a clay pot inside the cottage. More is used for cooking throughout the day. A portion is used for minimal cleaning of dishes and cooking implements. During weeks when laundry is scheduled, significantly more water must be fetched and heated, a process that consumes an entire day and leaves Ilara exhausted. Today is not laundry day, so the water requirements are merely normal rather than extraordinary. Normal is still exhausting. Extraordinary is simply more exhausting. After completing the morning water trips, Ilara turns her attention to the vegetable garden beside the cottage. The garden requires daily maintenance during the growing season, weeding, checking for pest damage, harvesting vegetables that have reached appropriate size. She works on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds by hand, inspecting each plant individually. The turnips are growing adequately, their green tops showing healthy color. The cabbages show some damage from insects, leaves with holes eaten through them, but the damage is not severe enough to warrant concern. She picks several caterpillars from the cabbage leaves and crushes them between her fingers, small acts of violence that protect the family's food supply. She harvests 2 turnips and 4 carrots, vegetables that have reached adequate size for eating. These will be added to tonight's stew, providing variety and nutrition beyond the grain that forms the base of every meal. She brushes dirt from the vegetables and carries them inside, placing them in a basket that serves as temporary storage until cooking time. The garden's yield is modest but critical. During lean times when grain stores run low, the vegetables from this small plot can mean the difference between adequate nutrition and malnutrition that leads to illness and death. Sarah helps her mother when instructed, performing simple tasks that a 7-year-old can manage. She fetches items from inside the cottage when Ilara needs them. She pulls weeds from the garden under her mother's supervision, learning to distinguish between food plants and unwanted growth. She minds the hearth fire, adding small pieces of wood when the flames begin to diminish, ensuring that the fire never goes completely out. These tasks are training for her future role as a farmer's wife, skills she will need when she marries and manages her own household. The training is not formal or structured, but occurs naturally through daily participation in household work. The morning hours pass slowly, measured not by clock, but by the sun's hidden position above the clouds, and by the progress of work completed. Gareth and Thomas move gradually across the wheat field, leaving behind rows of cultivated soil with weeds removed and discarded. Ilara moves through her tasks in sequence, fetching water, tending garden, beginning preparation for the midday meal, mending a tear in one of Thomas's shirts while the stew pot heats. Each person works within their assigned sphere, performing labor that has been performed by countless generations before them and will be performed by countless generations after them if humanity survives long enough. The midday meal is eaten in the fields rather than in the cottage, because returning home wastes time and energy that should be devoted to work. Ilara prepares simple food that can be carried, bread baked yesterday, and cheese obtained through trade with a neighbor who keeps goats. She wraps the food in cloth and walks to the fields with Sarah, finding Gareth and Thomas still working 2/3 of the way through the wheat rows. The family sits on the ground near the field edge, eating quickly, washing down the bread and cheese with water from a clay jug that Ilara brought from the cottage. The meal break lasts perhaps 30 minutes, long enough to rest slightly, but not long enough for muscles to stiffen. Gareth's back appreciates the change in position, the opportunity to sit rather than bend, but he knows from experience that sitting too long makes resuming work more difficult. He stands before his body wants to stand, returns to the hoe and the rows of wheat. Thomas follows his father's example, learning through observation that rest is a luxury afforded in measured doses rather than taken freely. Ilara and Sarah return to the cottage, where afternoon work awaits, endless tasks that will continue until darkness makes work impossible. The afternoon follows the morning's pattern, identical labor continuing with identical effort. The sun moves across the sky behind clouds that never break to reveal blue. The temperature rises to its daily peak, perhaps 15 degrees Celsius, warm enough that Gareth removes his wool tunic and works in his undershirt despite the impropriety of being partially unclothed. The sweat that began in the morning becomes more pronounced, soaking his undershirt, making the fabric cling to his skin. The salt from evaporated sweat makes his skin itch, but scratching wastes time that should be spent working. Work continues until the light begins to fail, the grey sky darkening toward evening. Gareth evaluates the remaining rows and decides that finishing them would require working in darkness that makes effective weeding impossible. He and Thomas gather their tools and walk back toward the cottage, their pace slower than in the morning, bodies depleted by 10 hours of continuous labor. Gareth's back has progressed beyond pain into a state of numbness punctuated by sharp spasms when he moves incorrectly. Thomas walks with the slight limp that indicates blisters on his feet, injuries that will hurt more tomorrow after inflammation sets in during the night. They arrive at the cottage as Ilara finishes preparing the evening meal, the day's main food event. The iron pot contains stew made from water, barley, turnips, carrots, onions, and small pieces of salted pork cut from the strips hanging in the rafters. The stew has been cooking for 2 hours, ingredients breaking down into a thick mixture that will provide calories and warmth. The smell of cooking fills the cottage, a pleasant scent that reminds the body of hunger that was suppressed during the working day through sheer necessity. Gareth and Thomas wash their hands and faces in cold water, removing the worst of the dirt and sweat, before sitting at the table. The stew is served in the 4 wooden bowls, portions distributed according to the same logic that governed breakfast. The family eats with intensity born of genuine hunger, using bread to soak up every drop of liquid from the bowls. The conversation during dinner is minimal but more present than during breakfast. Gareth mentions the progress made in the fields, approximately 20% of the wheat weeding completed, 5 more days of work required to finish at current pace. Ilara reports that the Henderson family to the south has a new baby, information learned from Martha Henderson during a brief conversation at the well. This news is received without comment because new babies are common and frequently do not survive their first year. After the meal, the evening routine begins. Ilara clears the bowls and washes them in water heated by the fire, scrubbing with a rough cloth, rinsing in clean water, setting them to dry on the shelf. Gareth tends to his tools, using the whetstone to sharpen the hose blade, checking the handle for cracks or loosening, applying a small amount of oil to prevent rust on the metal. Thomas practices his carving, working on a piece of wood he hopes to transform into a spoon, learning the craft his grandfather knew. Sarah plays briefly with her corn husk doll before Ilara assigns her the task of spinning wool, working the drop spindle to create thread that will eventually be woven into fabric. As darkness becomes complete, the family's activities slow and eventually cease. Candles are not lit because the current activities do not require the additional light, and because candles cost money that should be preserved for genuine emergencies. The hearth fire provides the only illumination, casting dancing shadows across the cottage interior, creating an atmosphere that would be cozy if the circumstances were different and the poverty less grinding. The children are sent to bed first, Thomas and Sarah sharing their small bed, covering themselves with their 2 blankets against the cold that is already infiltrating the cottage despite the fire. Gareth and Ilara remain awake longer, sitting near the hearth, speaking in low voices so as not to disturb the children. Their conversation covers practical matters: what needs to be done tomorrow, what supplies are running low, whether the approaching winter will be harsher than last winter. They do not speak of hopes or dreams, because those concepts seem increasingly irrelevant to lives defined by survival rather than aspiration. They do not speak of love because their partnership is understood rather than articulated, demonstrated through daily cooperation rather than through words. They are companions in hardship, united by shared struggle, bound by children and land and history. Gareth mentions the Defier scout spotted 2 weeks ago. Ilara tightens her expression but does not speak. They have discussed this threat multiple times, developed plans for evacuation if raiders come, identified hiding places for the children. Nothing new remains to be said, but the threat hangs over them constantly, unspoken but present. Gareth reassures Ilara that he has reinforced the door, that his sword is sharp, that he will protect the family. She nods because she wants to believe this protection is possible, though both know that one man with a rusty sword cannot stop determined attackers. But acknowledging this fact aloud serves no purpose. They retire to bed when the fire burns low, banking the coals with ash to preserve them until morning. They climb into their bed and pull their blankets over themselves, lying close together for warmth and comfort. The cottage settles into nighttime sounds, the creak of cooling wood, the scrabble of mice, the distant call of an owl, the wind that always finds gaps in the walls and shutters. Gareth does not fall asleep immediately because his mind continues working, planning tomorrow's tasks, worrying about threats, remembering the Defias attack 5 years ago, wondering whether tonight will be the night they return. Eventually, exhaustion overwhelms anxiety, and sleep comes, fitful and incomplete but sufficient. This routine repeats tomorrow and the day after, and the day after that. The specific tasks vary slightly. Weeding gives way to other fieldwork as seasons change, but the fundamental pattern remains constant. Wake before dawn, revive the fire, eat porridge, work until exhausted, eat stew, sleep. The week's 7th day is supposedly reserved for rest according to the light's teachings, but rest is a luxury that peasant families cannot afford. The weeding does not cease because the calendar declares a holy day. The crops do not stop growing. The threats do not pause. So work continues 7 days a week, with perhaps slightly shorter hours on the 7th day and attendance at religious services if Brother Malthus happens to be conducting them nearby. The seasons impose their own variations on this routine. Spring brings ploughing and planting, the most critical work of the year because errors made during planting cannot be corrected later. Summer brings constant weeding, watering if drought conditions require it, and vigilance against pests that multiply rapidly in warm weather. Autumn brings harvest, the longest working days of the year, entire family laboring from before dawn until after dark to gather crops before weather turns. Winter brings relative rest, though rest is never complete. Maintenance work on tools and cottage, survival on stored food, cold that makes every activity more difficult. Market day occurs monthly if conditions permit travel. Gareth, Ilara, and sometimes the children walk the 3 miles to Sentinel Hill, where farmers gather to trade goods and purchase necessities. These trips provide essential supplies: salt, metal goods, seeds for planting, items that the family cannot produce themselves. Market day also provides social contact beyond immediate neighbors, opportunities to exchange news and gossip, to learn about threats in other areas, to maintain connections with the broader community. But market day also exposes the family to danger. Bandits target the roads during market times, and the journey is made with weapons ready and constant vigilance. Militia muster occurs monthly as well, a mandatory obligation for all able-bodied men between 16 and 50 years old. Gareth attends these musters at Sentinel Hill, where Grian Stoutmantle, leader of the People's Militia, conducts basic military training and organizes the defense of Westfall's remaining settlements. The training is rudimentary: formation marching, basic sword techniques, coordination during simulated combat. The militia is poorly equipped and poorly organized compared to professional soldiers, but it represents the only defense that Westfall possesses. When the bell rings at Sentinel Hill signaling an attack, farmers are expected to leave their work and respond with whatever weapons they own. Response is not optional. Failure to respond is desertion, punishable by loss of land and potential execution. This is daily life for Gareth Millstone and his family. This is daily life for hundreds of families across Westfall, for thousands of families across human territories, for millions of peasants throughout Azeroth who toil in fields and live in cottages and struggle to survive in a world that offers them no mercy and minimal assistance. Their lives are not romantic or heroic. They do not have adventures or win glory. They work until their bodies break and then they die, and their children take their places, and the cycle continues. This is the reality that underlies kingdoms and wars, and the great events that history records. While nobles make decisions and armies march and heroes quest for legendary artifacts, peasants plant wheat and pull weeds and hope that they live long enough to see another harvest. The 3 acres that Gareth farms exist for a single purpose: to extract from the soil enough food to keep his family alive through winter and provide surplus for trade. This calculation dominates every decision made during the growing season. How much land to devote to each crop, when to plant, how aggressively to weed, when to harvest. The mathematics of survival are simple in theory. The family requires approximately 3 pounds of grain per person per day to maintain basic nutrition. 4 people consuming 12 pounds daily, 360 pounds monthly, 4,320 pounds yearly. 3 acres of adequately managed farmland can produce, in a good year with favorable weather and minimal pest damage, approximately 6,000 pounds of grain, along with several hundred pounds of vegetables from the garden. This leaves a surplus of approximately 1,680 pounds of grain after accounting for family consumption. From this surplus must come the tithe owed to Stormwind's government, 15% of the total harvest, regardless of whether the harvest is good or poor. 15% of 6,000 pounds equals 900 pounds, leaving 780 pounds for trade and emergency reserves. This 780 pounds must be traded for everything the family cannot produce themselves. Salt costs 3 silver coins per pound, and the family uses approximately 10 pounds yearly, consuming 30 silver coins worth of purchasing power. Metal tools, when they must be replaced, cost between 5 and 20 silver coins depending on the item. Fabric for clothing costs 2 silver coins per yard, and the family requires approximately 5 yards yearly. Seeds for planting must be purchased or saved from previous harvest, but saved seeds often produce inferior crops, making purchased seeds preferable when affordable. The economics are precarious. In a good year, the surplus is adequate to cover necessary purchases and leave a small amount for savings. In a poor year, when weather or pests reduce the harvest, the surplus disappears and the family must dip into savings or go into debt. 2 consecutive poor years can destroy a family's economic stability entirely, forcing them into debt that they cannot escape. 3 consecutive poor years mean loss of the land and descent into tenant farming or worse. Gareth has experienced good years and poor years in roughly equal measure during his 23 years of farming this land. The savings chest currently holds 12 silver coins, accumulated over several good years, insufficient to survive one truly catastrophic harvest failure. The tithe to Stormwind is collected each autumn by agents who travel from farm to farm with armed escorts. The agents are not soldiers but bureaucrats, clerks who measure harvests and calculate what is owed, who record the payments in ledgers that are transported back to the capital. The armed escorts exist because farmers sometimes resist paying tithes, particularly during years when paying means their families will starve. The resistance is usually verbal rather than violent, arguments and pleading that the agents hear hundreds of times and ignore with professional indifference. The tithe must be paid. The kingdom requires revenue to fund its military, its bureaucracy, its reconstruction efforts after multiple wars. Individual hardship is unfortunate but irrelevant to these larger imperatives. Gareth pays his tithe without argument because he understands that resistance is futile and dangerous. He measures out 900 pounds of wheat, loads it onto the agent's wagon, receives a stamped receipt that documents his compliance. The receipt is stored in the wooden chest with other important documents, proof that he has fulfilled his obligations should anyone question it in the future. The agents depart with full wagon, moving to the next farm, repeating the extraction process. They do not ask whether the family has enough food remaining. They do not care that this 900 pounds represents weeks of labor and significant risk of hunger during late winter. They simply take what is owed and move on. The food the family consumes directly is monotonous and barely adequate. Grain forms the foundation of every meal, prepared as porridge for breakfast, as bread for midday meals, as thickening agent for evening stews. The grain is primarily barley rather than wheat, because wheat commands higher prices when traded, and barley provides equivalent nutrition at lower cost. The barley is ground into flour using a hand mill, a process that requires significant labor, turning a stone grinder while feeding grain into the mechanism. The resulting flour is coarse and contains pieces of hull that make the bread rough-textured and difficult to chew. But these qualities are irrelevant compared to the flour's ability to fill stomachs. Vegetables supplement the grain when available. Turnips grow reliably in Westfall's soil and store well through winter, making them a staple. The turnips are boiled until soft, mashed, added to stews, or eaten plain. Their taste is bland and slightly bitter, improved marginally by salt when salt can be spared. Cabbage provides similar utility, growing adequately and storing reasonably well, though cabbage attracts more pests than turnips and requires more vigilant protection during the growing season. Carrots add occasional variety, their slight sweetness a welcome change from the blandness of turnips and cabbage. But carrots are less productive per square foot of garden and therefore grown in smaller quantities. Onions serve primarily as flavoring rather than substantial food, their strong taste making bland meals marginally more interesting. Meat is rare and precious. The family cannot afford to keep livestock beyond a few chickens, and even chickens require feed that competes with human food needs. The chickens provide eggs when they lay, perhaps 3 or 4 eggs per week when the birds are productive, fewer during winter or when the chickens are molting. An egg is treasured, added to porridge or bread to increase protein content and improve texture. Once yearly, if the harvest has been adequate, Gareth purchases a pig from a neighbor who raises them. The pig is butchered in autumn, the meat salted immediately to prevent spoilage. A pig provides perhaps 150 pounds of meat after butchering, a substantial quantity that seems nearly inexhaustible when first hung from the rafters, but diminishes steadily through winter as the family cuts small portions for stews. The salting process is critical and expensive. Salt preserves meat by drawing out moisture that bacteria require for growth, but effective preservation requires generous application of salt that covers all exposed surfaces. Salting 150 pounds of pork requires approximately 15 pounds of salt, 45 silver coins worth at current prices, nearly half the family's annual salt budget. The alternative to salting is smoking, but smoking requires specialized equipment and constant attention that Gareth cannot spare. Some families share access to communal smokehouses, but the nearest such facility is 6 miles distant, too far to transport meat safely. So salting remains the only viable option, expensive but necessary. Fish would provide alternative protein if fishing were practical, but the nearest stream lies half a mile east of the cottage, and fishing requires time that is difficult to spare during growing season. During winter, when fieldwork diminishes, Gareth occasionally spends an afternoon at the stream with a crude fishing line, hoping to catch trout or bass. His success rate is perhaps 1 fish per 3 attempts, insufficient to justify regular fishing trips, but the occasional fish provides welcome dietary variation. The fish are cleaned immediately after catching, cooked that same evening before spoilage begins. Fish cannot be easily preserved without smoking or heavy salting, so they must be eaten fresh, making them an unpredictable luxury rather than reliable food source. Wild foods supplement the diet when available and when time permits foraging. Berries grow in patches throughout Westfall's remaining woodlands. Blackberries in summer, elderberries in late summer, Ilara and Sarah sometimes spend afternoons picking berries, filling baskets that are brought home and consumed fresh or dried for winter storage. The dried berries add occasional sweetness to otherwise bland porridge, a treat that makes breakfast marginally more pleasant. Mushrooms grow in damp areas, and Ilara knows which varieties are safe to eat and which are poisonous, knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother. The safe mushrooms are fried in small amounts of rendered pork fat, creating a dish that tastes luxurious compared to boiled turnips. Nuts could provide protein and fat, but the nut trees in Westfall have been largely harvested by desperate families competing for the same resources. The few remaining productive trees are located in areas claimed by specific families who guard them jealously. Trespassing to gather nuts risks confrontation that could turn violent. Gareth does not take these risks for the small amount of food that nuts would provide. Wild greens grow in fields and forest edges, dandelions and other edible plants that Ilara gathers in spring when they are tender. The greens are boiled to remove bitterness, then eaten as side dishes or added to stews. They provide minimal calories, but contribute vitamins that prevent diseases associated with limited diets. Food preservation determines whether the family survives winter. The harvest gathered in autumn must last until the following summer, when new crops become available. This span of approximately 8 months requires that food be stored in forms that do not spoil. Grain stores relatively well if kept dry and protected from pests. The grain is placed in large clay pots with tight-fitting wooden lids, stored in the cottage's coolest corner. Despite precautions, mice infiltrate the storage and consume small amounts. Gareth estimates that mice theft costs the family perhaps 5% of stored grain annually, approximately £250, enough to feed the family for 3 weeks. This loss is factored into planning, accounted for, but not preventable. Vegetables are stored in the root cellar, a pit dug beneath the cottage floor in the sleeping area, approximately 4 feet deep and 3 feet square. The pit is lined with stones to prevent collapse and covered with wooden boards that form part of the floor. The root cellar maintains cooler temperature than the cottage's interior and protects vegetables from freezing during winter. Turnips and carrots are layered in the cellar with sand between layers to prevent contact and decay. Cabbage is hung from hooks in the cellar's upper section, heads suspended to allow air circulation. Under ideal conditions, the root cellar keeps vegetables edible for 4 to 5 months. Under actual conditions, some vegetables rot and must be discarded, loss that Ilara tries to minimize through regular inspection. The meat hanging from rafters represents the family's protein reserve, and its preservation is absolutely critical. If the salting fails and the meat spoils, the family loses their primary protein source for the entire winter. Ilara checks the meat daily, looking for signs of decay, discoloration, unusual odor, moisture accumulation. She rotates the strips so that all surfaces receive adequate air circulation. Despite these precautions, some spoilage occurs. The outer portions of the meat darken and develop off flavors, portions that must be cut away and discarded or fed to the chickens. By late winter, approximately 20% of the original meat has been lost to spoilage or trimming, 30 pounds wasted despite all efforts to preserve it. Hunger becomes familiar during late winter and early spring, the period Westfall farmers call the hungry months. The stored food that seemed abundant in autumn diminishes through winter as the family eats steadily from reserves that do not replenish. By the beginning of spring, the grain pots are half empty. The root cellar contains only shriveled turnips and sprouting potatoes. The meat has been consumed except for a few strips saved for emergencies. The family reduces portions gradually, eating less at each meal, stretching supplies to last until summer. The children are fed slightly larger portions than adults because growing bodies need nutrition. and because parents silently accept that their own hunger is preferable to their children's. The physical effects of reduced rations are noticeable, but not discussed. Energy levels drop. Work becomes more exhausting. Concentration becomes difficult. Sleep is disrupted by stomach cramps. The children's growth slows or stops temporarily. Minor injuries heal more slowly. Resistance to disease decreases, making the hungry months also the sick months, when fevers and coughs spread through families and communities. Some winters are worse than others. 3 years ago, during a winter that followed a poor harvest, Sarah developed a cough that persisted for 6 weeks. Ilara feared pneumonia, which kills many children in Westfall. The cough eventually resolved without intervention, but the fear of losing a child to starvation-related illness haunts both parents. Water is as critical as food and requires constant labor to obtain. The shared well provides adequate quantity during most of the year, but the 40 paces separating cottage from well become exhausting when walked 12 to 14 times daily carrying heavy buckets. Ilara's shoulders have developed visible muscle from years of this labor, but the muscle comes with chronic pain that worsens during cold weather. The water is used for drinking primarily, approximately 1 gallon per person daily, 4 gallons total. Cooking requires another 2 gallons daily for porridge preparation, stew making, and occasional cleaning. Washing faces and hands uses perhaps 1 gallon. The remaining gallon is distributed across various needs: watering the garden during dry periods, providing drinking water for chickens, occasional cleaning of the cottage floor. Bathing is rare because it requires heating large quantities of water, labor that is difficult to justify when that labor could be spent on food production. The family bathes perhaps once monthly during warm weather, carrying buckets of water to a secluded area near the stream, washing with cold water and harsh soap. During winter, bathing ceases almost entirely because the risk of hypothermia outweighs the benefits of cleanliness. Bodies are wiped down with damp cloths occasionally, but thorough washing does not occur. The resulting odors are unpleasant but universal. Everyone in Westfall smells similarly of unwashed skin, wood smoke, and stale sweat. The smell becomes unnoticeable through constant exposure. Laundry requires an entire day's labor and massive quantities of water. Ilara performs laundry approximately once monthly, choosing days when weather is warm and dry. She carries clothing to the stream, kneels on the bank, pounds fabric against rocks while scrubbing with soap made from animal fat and wood ash. The soap is caustic and damages both fabric and skin. Ilara's hands after laundry day are raw and cracked, sometimes bleeding from the combination of chemical burns and mechanical abrasion. The clothing is rinsed in stream water, wrung out by hand, carried back to the cottage soaking wet and heavy, spread on bushes to dry. If rain comes before the clothing dries, the process must be repeated, doubling the labor for no gain. Fuel for the hearth fire is gathered continuously throughout the year. Thomas spends hours each week in the forest gathering fallen branches, loading them into a sack, carrying them home. The wood must be dry or nearly dry to burn efficiently. Green wood produces excessive smoke and insufficient heat, making it useless for cooking. The fallen branches are supplemented by larger pieces cut from dead trees using a handsaw, exhausting work that produces wood that must be split with an axe before it can fit in the hearth. The family requires approximately 1 cord of wood monthly during winter, less during summer, but still substantial. Gathering this quantity requires perhaps 15 hours of labor weekly, time that competes with other essential tasks. The hearth fire is managed carefully to minimize fuel consumption. The fire is never allowed to become larger than necessary for current needs. Cooking is consolidated when possible, preparing multiple meals worth of food in single cooking sessions. During winter, the fire is maintained at a level that provides minimal heat, while preserving coals for easy rekindling. Banking the fire at night saves fuel and prevents the need to restart fire each morning, which would consume valuable flint, steel, and tinder. The flint and steel are precious because they cannot be easily replaced. If they are lost or broken, starting fire becomes extremely difficult, potentially impossible without borrowing these tools from neighbors. Clothing represents another resource that requires constant management. Each person's 2 sets of clothing must last for years because fabric is expensive and sewing new clothing is labor-intensive. Ilara inspects all clothing weekly for tears, weak seams, excessive wear. She mends small problems immediately before they become large problems. A small tear is fixed in minutes with needle and thread. A large tear requires extensive patching that may take hours. When fabric becomes too damaged to mend, it is cut into pieces that serve as rags for cleaning or as patches for other garments. Nothing is discarded while it retains any utility. The children's clothing presents special challenges because children grow. Thomas's trousers become too short within months of being made. His tunic sleeves no longer reach his wrists. Ilara adjusts the clothing when possible, letting out seams, adding strips of fabric to extend length. But eventually the clothing cannot be adjusted further, and new garments must be made. This requires purchasing fabric, approximately 3 yards for a tunic and trousers, 6 silver coins worth of expense. The expenditure is delayed as long as possible, tolerated until Thomas's clothing becomes truly inadequate, but eventually necessity demands action. Sarah's clothing passes through similar cycles of wear, adjustment, replacement, though she grows more slowly than her brother and requires new clothing less frequently. Footwear is particularly problematic because shoes wear out from constant use. Gareth's leather shoes are repaired continuously, new leather patches added to soles, seams restitched, structural repairs made using whatever materials are available. The shoes belong to his father and are perhaps 30 years old, far exceeding their intended lifespan. They remain functional through constant maintenance, but they are uncomfortable and provide inadequate protection against cold and moisture. Eventually, they will fail completely, and Gareth will need new shoes, a purchase that will cost approximately 8 silver coins from a cobbler, if any cobblers remain in Westfall who accept commissions from poor farmers. The children wear wooden clogs that Gareth carves from single pieces of wood during winter evenings. The clogs are uncomfortable and cause blisters, but they protect feet from sharp objects and cold ground. The clogs last approximately 1 year before the wood wears through or splits, requiring new clogs to be carved. Carving a pair of clogs requires approximately 6 hours of work, but the time is spent during winter when outdoor work is impossible, and the labor cost is minimal. The alternative would be purchasing wooden clogs from a craftsman for perhaps 2 silver coins per pair, expense that can be avoided through Gareth's own labor. Tools are the family's most critical material possession after the cottage itself. Without functional tools, the farm cannot be worked. The iron hoe blade that Gareth uses daily to work the soil costs approximately 5 silver coins to replace. The blade currently in use has been sharpened so many times that it is noticeably smaller than when new, metal worn away gradually through decades of sharpening. Eventually, the blade will become too small to function effectively and must be replaced, an expense that Gareth dreads. The wooden handle of the hoe is easier to replace because Gareth can carve a new handle from appropriate wood, but finding wood of the correct dimensions and hardness requires time and effort. The other farming implements present similar concerns. The sickle used for harvesting grain has a curved iron blade that must remain sharp to function. The rake's iron teeth bend occasionally and must be straightened or replaced. The wooden plow requires regular maintenance, structural repairs to prevent breaking during critical plowing season. The saw used for cutting firewood loses its teeth through use and must be resharpened by someone with specialized knowledge that Gareth lacks. Each tool represents both financial investment and ongoing maintenance obligation. The tools must be protected from rust, stored carefully, inspected regularly, repaired promptly when problems emerge. The iron cooking pot is irreplaceable in practical terms. Its value exceeds 20 silver coins, more than the family's entire savings. If the pot were to crack or break, acquiring a replacement would require going into debt or accepting charity from neighbors who have their own needs. Ilara treats the pot with extreme care, never exposing it to sudden temperature changes that might cause cracking, never allowing it to overheat empty, never striking it with metal implements that might damage the surface. The pot is cleaned carefully after each use, dried thoroughly to prevent rust, stored safely when not in use. After 15 years of this careful treatment, the pot shows minimal wear and should last for decades more if the care continues. Debt is a specter that haunts every farming family in Westfall. One bad harvest can create debt that requires years to repay. 2 bad harvests create debt that may never be repaid. The merchants who extend credit charge interest rates that compound the debt faster than poor farmers can pay it down. Gareth has avoided debt so far through careful management and reasonable luck with harvests, but many of his neighbors are trapped in debt cycles that will likely end with loss of their land. Marcus Henderson owes 8 silver coins to a merchant in Sentinel Hill for tools purchased 3 years ago. The debt has grown to 12 silver coins through interest charges. Marcus pays 2 silver coins yearly toward the debt, barely covering the interest, the principal amount remaining nearly unchanged. The cycle works like this. A farmer has a poor harvest and lacks sufficient surplus to purchase necessary supplies. He borrows from a merchant to buy seed for planting, agreeing to repay the loan plus 20% interest after the next harvest. If the next harvest is good, he can repay the debt and escape with only modest loss. But if the next harvest is also poor, he must borrow again to cover both the previous debt and new needs. The debt compounds. Interest accrues on interest. Within a few years, the farmer owes more than his farm produces annually. He can never catch up. He pays endlessly, transferring his labor's fruits to the merchant, working his own land but effectively farming for someone else's profit. The ultimate consequence of unmanageable debt is loss of land. The merchant forecloses, a legal process that transfers ownership of the land from farmer to creditor. The farmer becomes a tenant on land he formerly owned, paying rent that typically exceeds what he previously paid in debt service. The land passes out of the family, ending whatever continuity existed across generations. Some families flee Westfall entirely rather than accept this fate, becoming refugees who seek opportunity elsewhere. But opportunities are scarce throughout human territories, and refugees are rarely welcomed. Many who flee Westfall end up worse off than those who stayed, starving in cities or dying on the roads between settlements. Trade occurs primarily during monthly market day at Sentinel Hill. Gareth brings surplus grain, vegetables, anything the family can spare, loads it into a small cart that he pulls himself because the family cannot afford a mule or ox. The 3-mile journey to Sentinel Hill takes approximately 2 hours, walking steadily but not rushing to avoid arriving exhausted. At the market, dozens of farmers display their goods, competing for buyers who are primarily traveling merchants from Stormwind or Elwyn Forest. The merchants understand that the farmers are desperate and negotiate accordingly, offering low prices, refusing to budge when farmers counteroffer. Gareth sells 40 pounds of wheat for 3 silver coins, less than he hoped but more than some others receive. He purchases 10 pounds of salt for 30 silver coins, an enormous expenditure that consumes all profit from the grain sale, plus additional funds from savings. Salt is expensive but absolutely necessary, and merchants know this, pricing accordingly. He examines metal tools displayed by a merchant who travels from Stormwind, considers purchasing a replacement hoe blade, decides that his current blade will last another year if he is careful with it. The decision to delay the purchase might prove false economy if the blade breaks during crucial work season. But spending 5 silver coins now means those coins are not available for other needs. Barter occurs alongside monetary transactions. Gareth trades a basket of turnips to a neighbor for 6 eggs, an exchange that benefits both parties without involving coins that are scarce for everyone. He trades labor for goods when possible, agreeing to help a neighbor with harvest in exchange for use of that neighbor's ox for plowing. These informal arrangements form a parallel economy that supplements the formal market, allowing peasant families to access resources they could not purchase with their limited money supply. The arrangements require trust and memory, since they often involve delayed reciprocity, future labor promised in exchange for present goods. The market also serves social functions beyond pure commerce. Gareth learns news from other farmers about Defias activity in different areas, about gnoll raids, about which roads are safe and which are dangerous. He hears rumors about kingdom politics, wars in distant lands, events that have no immediate impact on his life, but provide context for understanding why Stormwind's government makes certain decisions. He sees Brother Malthus, the traveling priest, who will conduct services at a farm 5 miles north next 7th day. Gareth notes this information, planning to attend if work permits. Ilara speaks with other women, trading information about herbal remedies, pregnancy, children, the countless small pieces of knowledge that help families survive. The margin between survival and catastrophe is thin, measured in a few £100 of grain, a dozen silver coins, the functioning of critical tools. Gareth understands this reality without need for articulation. He plans carefully, works constantly, maintains vigilance against waste and loss. But planning and work and vigilance cannot prevent all disasters. Weather cannot be controlled. Pests cannot be completely eliminated. Bandits cannot be stopped by individual farmers. Disease strikes without warning. The threats are numerous and the defenses are minimal. Most families survive most years through combination of effort and luck. But some families every year fail to survive, losing crops or members or both, sliding from precarious stability into destitution or death. What keeps Gareth working despite these odds is absence of alternatives. He could abandon the farm, but go where? Do what? Cities offer no opportunities for unskilled laborers, and Gareth's skills are specific to farming. He could join the Defias, trading legal vulnerability for security within a criminal organization. But joining the Defias means becoming an outlaw, living in constant danger of execution, attacking people like himself. He could attempt migration to another region, but every region faces similar problems. Lord Eron has fallen to the Scourge. Gilneas is isolated behind their wall. Duskwood is overrun with undead and Worgen. Redridge is barely holding against Blackrock orcs. There is nowhere to go that is significantly better than Westfall, and moving requires resources the family does not have. So Gareth stays, works the land his grandfather's grandfather cleared, grows grain that his family eats and trades, maintains the cottage that houses his family, and hopes that this year's harvest is adequate. He does not hope for prosperity because prosperity is not attainable for peasant farmers in Westfall's current circumstances. He hopes only for sufficiency, for enough food to prevent starvation, enough surplus to cover basic needs, enough luck to avoid catastrophe for one more year. This limited hope is realistic and dignified. It represents acknowledgement of reality without surrender to despair. And for now, today, this morning as he walks to his fields with hoe over his shoulder, this hope is enough to continue. The cottage stands in Westfall, and this fact alone defines the primary threat to its occupants. Westfall is not a peaceful agricultural region where farmers work unmolested by forces beyond weather and crop failure. Westfall is a contested territory where multiple threats converge, where the kingdom's authority has fractured, where protection that once existed nominally has ceased to exist in practice. The People's Militia, commanded by Grian Stoutmantle from Sentinel Hill, numbers approximately 200 farmers who own weapons and have agreed to respond when danger manifests. 200 poorly trained, poorly equipped men attempting to defend an agricultural region that once housed 20,000 people. The mathematics of this protection are simple and devastating. When attack comes, help does not arrive in time. Gareth understands the threat landscape through years of experience and through stories told by neighbors and militia members. He categorizes threats by frequency and severity, calculating which dangers require constant vigilance and which can be addressed reactively. The Defiers Brotherhood represents the most constant and severe threat. The Defiers are not disorganized bandits, but a structured organization with leadership, strategy, and significant numbers. They control the Dead Mines, the former gold mining complex that now serves as their fortress and base of operations. From the Dead Mines, they launch raids throughout Westfall, targeting farms, merchant caravans, anyone vulnerable enough to victimize. The Defiers were not always criminals. Their origin story is known to every Westfall resident. After the Second War, when Stormwind lay in ruins, the kingdom hired stonemasons to rebuild the capital. The stonemasons, led by Edwin Van Cleef, performed this work for years, constructing the magnificent architecture that now defines Stormwind. When the work concluded, the kingdom refused to pay the agreed wages. The nobles claimed insufficient funds. They offered partial payment. Van Cleef and his workers protested, demanding the compensation they had earned through years of labor. The kingdom responded with soldiers rather than payment. The stonemasons were driven from the city, branded as troublemakers, denied the wages that would have fed their families. Van Cleef, betrayed by the kingdom he helped rebuild, formed the Defiers Brotherhood. The stonemasons became bandits. Their grievance was legitimate. Their treatment by Stormwind's nobility was unjust. But their response to this injustice has been to terrorize the very people who had no role in their betrayal. The Defiers raid farms throughout Westfall, stealing food, murdering resistors, burning buildings. They kidnap farmers for ransom that families cannot pay. They ambush travelers on roads, rob merchants, attack militia members. Their cause began with justice but has descended into simple criminality, justified by historical grievance. Gareth holds complicated feelings about the Defiers. He understands their anger toward the kingdom that betrayed them. He agrees that the nobility acted dishonorably in refusing payment. He recognizes that Westfall's peasants and the Defiers' workers are victims of the same system, both exploited by powers that view them as expendable resources. But understanding their grievance does not excuse their violence. The Defiers do not target nobles who wrong them. They target farmers like Gareth, people who have nothing and can afford to lose even less. His sympathy for their cause died the night they invaded his home. 5 years ago, during autumn after the harvest had been gathered and stored, the Defiers came to the Millstone cottage. 6 men wearing red bandanas approached in darkness, moving quietly until they were close enough that retreat was impossible. Gareth heard them only when they began forcing the door. He rose from sleep, grabbed the militia sword that hangs near the bed, moved toward the door. The door burst inward, the bar breaking under coordinated strikes. 3 men entered while 3 remained outside as lookouts. Gareth engaged the first man, trading sword strikes in the darkness, lit only by dying hearth fire. He was outnumbered and outmatched. The Defiers carried weapons they knew how to use. They fought together with practiced coordination. The fight lasted perhaps 3 minutes. Gareth managed to wound one attacker, driving his sword point through the man's shoulder. But another attacker circled behind and struck Gareth's head with a club, a crushing blow that dropped him unconscious to the earthen floor. When he woke, the Defiers were gone. They had taken the winter grain stores, approximately 400 pounds of wheat and barley, food that represented 2 months of family sustenance. They had taken his best iron hoe, his sickle, several other tools. They had taken the iron cooking pot but dropped it outside when they heard someone approaching, leaving it lying in the dirt. Ilara and the children had hidden in the root cellar during the attack, escaping physical harm but traumatized by the sounds of violence occurring feet above their heads. Gareth's injury required 3 weeks to heal adequately for full work resumption. The scar remains, a raised line running from his right temple to his jawline, visible evidence of the night when violence entered his home. The stolen grain could not be replaced. The family survived that winter on reduced rations and charity, from neighbors who shared small amounts from their own limited stores. The experience taught Gareth that the door bar must never be forgotten, that weapons must always be within reach, that safety is an illusion that can shatter in moments. The children learned that their home is not safe, that danger can arrive without warning, that their parents cannot always protect them. Since that night, Gareth has seen Defiers operating in the area perhaps a dozen times. Sometimes they travel in groups on the roads, moving between the dead mines and raiding targets. Sometimes individual scouts observe farms, apparently evaluating which targets offer worthwhile plunder. 2 weeks ago, Gareth spotted a scout watching the cottage from a distant hill. The scout was visible for perhaps 10 minutes before disappearing. His presence was unmistakable. His purpose was clear. The cottage has been marked for another raid. When the Defiers return, they will come with sufficient numbers to overwhelm any resistance. They will take what they want. Whether they will kill anyone depends on whether anyone resists and how the raiders feel that particular night. The knowledge that another raid is coming, that the cottage is marked, hangs over the family constantly. Gareth has reinforced the door, adding iron strips scavenged from abandoned farms. He has sharpened his sword to the keenest edge it has held in years. He has taught Ilara the evacuation plan, where she should take the children if Defiers come, the hiding place in the forest where they should remain until he comes for them, or until dawn reveals whether he still lives. He has explained to Thomas what he must do if his father dies, how to care for his mother and sister, where to find help. These are not conversations any parent wants to have with a 12-year-old child, but necessity overrides preference. The Gnolls present a different category of threat, less organized than the Defiers, but more numerous and perhaps more savage. The Riverpaw Gnolls inhabit the hills west of the farming areas, living in tribal structures that human observers do not fully understand. The Gnolls are hyena-like humanoids standing approximately 6 feet tall, covered in fur, possessing powerful jaws capable of crushing bone. They communicate in a language of barks and laughs that sounds more animal than intelligent, though their behavior demonstrates clear intelligence and tactical thinking. They craft weapons, coordinate attacks, maintain territorial boundaries. They are not mindless beasts, but a different form of civilization that views humans as competitors for resources and sometimes as food. Gnoll raids follow patterns based on seasonal food availability. During spring and summer, when wildlife is abundant in the hills, Gnolls rarely venture into farming areas. During autumn and winter, when food becomes scarce, raids increase in frequency and violence. The Gnolls attack farms in packs, typically 6 to 12 individuals, overwhelming isolated families through sheer numbers. They steal livestock when available, grain stores, anything edible. They kill farmers who resist and sometimes kill farmers who do not resist. Violence that appears motivated by sport as much as necessity. The corpses of Gnoll victims are sometimes found mutilated, bones removed, suggesting that the Gnolls take trophies or practice rituals that humans find incomprehensible and horrifying. 8 months ago, the Grantham family 2 farms north of the Millstone cottage was attacked by Gnolls. Robert Grantham attempted to defend his home with a pitchfork, inadequate weapon against multiple attackers with superior equipment. The Gnolls killed him, killed his wife, Martha, took their 3 children. The children's bodies were never found. Whether they were killed and the bodies removed or taken alive for purposes unknown remains unclear. The Grantham farm now stands empty, its fields returning to wild grass, another abandoned property joining the dozens that dot Westfall's landscape. No one has claimed the farm because claiming it would mean living in a location where Gnolls successfully attacked, a precedent that suggests they will attack again. The Gnolls cannot be negotiated with. They do not speak human languages. They do not respond to offerings or threats. They operate according to their own logic that views humans as enemies or prey. The only defense against Gnolls is superior force, fighting them with sufficient numbers and weapons to kill enough of them that the survivors retreat. Individual farmers cannot provide this defense. The militia sometimes drives off Gnoll packs when multiple farmers respond together, but the militia cannot prevent Gnoll raids any more than it can prevent Defias raids. The best defense is vigilance, seeing Gnolls approaching early enough to evacuate or prepare defense, and luck, hoping the Gnolls choose to attack someone else. Murlocs represent a newer and growing threat. The Murlocs are amphibious creatures, fish-like humanoids standing approximately 4 feet tall, dwelling along Westfall's coast and increasingly spreading inland along streams and rivers. They make gurgling sounds that might be language or might be meaningless noise. They carry crude weapons, spears and clubs decorated with bones and shells. They attack humans who venture too close to water they have claimed. They occasionally raid farms near water sources, behavior that suggests territorial expansion rather than resource acquisition, since Murlocs do not appear to value human food or possessions. The Murlocs' motivation is unclear. They do not raid for food because they subsist on fish and aquatic plants. They do not appear to raid for territory because they do not occupy farms they attack. Some victims are killed, and their bodies left where they fell. Others are taken alive and dragged into water, never seen again. Speculation about what happens to these captives ranges from ritual sacrifice to some form of imprisonment to serving as food. No one knows because no one taken by Murlocs has ever returned to report their experience. The uncertainty makes Murlocs particularly unsettling as a threat. Death is comprehensible. Unknown fates are harder to process. Gareth avoids the stream as much as possible, sending Thomas to fish only during daylight hours when Murlocs are less active. Ilara performs laundry with another woman present, mutual protection against surprise attack. The children are forbidden to play near water without adult supervision. These precautions reduce risk but cannot eliminate it because the family requires water access for survival. The stream provides fish occasionally and serves as laundry location. Avoiding it entirely would mean losing these resources, trade-off that cannot be accepted. So the family uses the stream carefully, watching constantly for Murloc presence, retreating immediately if any sign of them appears. Rumors from the north speak of greater horrors. Travelers report that the Scourge, an army of undead led by a being called the Lich King, has devastated Lordaeron. Entire kingdoms have fallen. Cities have been destroyed. The living have been transformed into undead soldiers that serve powers of darkness. These reports seem fantastical to Westfall farmers who have never traveled north of Stormwind. The undead exist in children's nightmares and cautionary tales. not in reality. But the travelers who bring these reports appear genuine. Their fear is real. The refugees flowing south from ruined kingdoms support the stories. Something terrible has happened in the north, something that has driven thousands of people from their homes. No undead have been confirmed in Westfall, but farmers take precautions anyway. They acquire blessed weapons from Brother Malthus, swords and knives that the priest has consecrated with holy power believed to be effective against undead. They request holy water when the priest visits, small vials of consecrated liquid that supposedly burns undead flesh. Whether these protections work cannot be tested until undead arrive, but having them provides psychological comfort. If the undead come to Westfall, if the scourge spreads this far south, farmers will have some defense, however minimal. The alternative is facing undead completely unprepared, dying without resistance, joining the ranks of corpses that serve the Lich King. Wildlife presents constant low-level threat distinct from intelligent attackers like Defias and Gnolls. Wolves hunt in packs throughout Westfall's remaining forests and grasslands. The packs typically number 6 to 10 animals, large enough to bring down deer and cattle, large enough to threaten humans if the wolves are hungry and opportunities present themselves. Wolves generally avoid humans, but during harsh winters when prey is scarce, they become bolder. They probe farms looking for vulnerable livestock or unguarded children. 3 years ago, a wolf pack killed 2 sheep belonging to Derek Broxton. Last year, a pack attempted to enter a farm 5 miles south, driven off only when the farmer shot 1 wolf with a crossbow, and the others retreated with their wounded. Boars inhabit the forests, massive creatures weighing 300 pounds or more, equipped with tusks capable of disemboweling humans. Boars are not naturally aggressive, but become dangerous when cornered or when protecting young. Thomas knows to retreat if he encounters a boar while gathering firewood. Gareth has seen boar damage, trees torn by tusks, ground churned by rooting, evidence of power that could kill easily. He avoids confronting boars, giving them space, hoping they reciprocate by avoiding the farm. Bears are rarer but more dangerous, capable of killing humans with single blows. A bear attack 7 years ago killed a farmer in Moonbrook before that town fell completely to the Defias. The farmer's mistake was surprising the bear near its den. The bear's response was lethal and immediate. Environmental threats match violent threats in their capacity to destroy. Drought can reduce harvest yields by 50% or more, creating immediate food crisis. 2 years ago, spring rains failed to arrive adequately. The wheat germinated poorly. The plants that grew remained stunted. The harvest yielded 4,000 pounds instead of the expected 6,000. After setting aside family consumption and paying the tithe, almost no surplus remained for trade. The family entered winter with minimal reserves and no ability to purchase supplies. They survived on reduced rations, eating 2 meals daily instead of 3, stretching every resource to its limit. By spring, they were emaciated and weak, vulnerable to disease that fortunately did not strike. Flood presents opposite problem with similar consequences. Excessive rain drowns crops, washes away topsoil, makes fieldwork impossible during critical planting or harvesting windows. 6 years ago, autumn rains arrived during wheat harvest. The fields became mud. The wheat stalks fell over from the weight of water. The grain began to sprout while still attached to plants, ruining it for human consumption. Gareth managed to salvage approximately 60% of the crop through desperate labor, working in constant rain, developing fever from exposure that nearly killed him. The salvaged grain was of poor quality, suitable only for animal feed or for human consumption in dire circumstances. The family ate that grain throughout winter, bread that tasted moldy and made stomachs uneasy, but provided calories that kept them alive. Fire is feared above all environmental threats because it spreads rapidly and destroys completely. A fire that begins in one cottage's thatch roof can spread to neighboring buildings within minutes, consuming entire communities before firefighting efforts can organize. 9 years ago, a fire started in a farm half a mile from the Millstone cottage. The blaze began when cooking oil ignited during meal preparation. The oil fire spread to wooden furniture, then to the thatch roof, then to adjacent structures. 6 buildings burned before the fire exhausted its fuel. 2 people died in the initial cottage, trapped by flames that moved faster than they could escape. The burned foundations still mark where those buildings stood, warning against carelessness with fire. Human threats extend beyond organized groups like the Defiers. Individual criminals, deserters from military service, desperate refugees, all represent potential danger. A lone bandit is less dangerous than a Defias raid, but more likely to be encountered. Bandits target travelers primarily, attacking people moving between settlements who carry trade goods or coins. But bandits also rob isolated farms when opportunity presents. 3 months ago, a farm 2 miles south was robbed by 2 men who claimed to be traveling merchants. They entered the cottage under pretense of trading, then drew weapons and demanded valuables. The farm family surrendered their savings, 7 silver coins, rather than risk violence. The bandits departed without killing anyone, but the family lost resources they could not afford to lose. Deserters are particularly problematic because they possess military training and equipment. Soldiers who flee from army service are hunted by military authorities, but can hide in regions like Westfall, where authority is weak. The deserters need food and shelter, and they take these from people unable to resist armed men with combat experience. Most deserters are not evil but desperate, fleeing wars they want no part of, trying to survive in a system that offers them no legitimate options. But their desperation makes them dangerous. A desperate man with sword and no food will take food regardless of who suffers from that taking. Inter-neighbor tensions occasionally explode into violence. Scarcity breeds conflict even among people who should cooperate. Disputes over water usage, over boundary lines between properties, over livestock that wanders onto neighbors' land, over countless small grievances can escalate when stress and hunger strip away social restraints. 4 years ago, 2 farmers 3 miles north fought over a section of land both claimed. The fight resulted in 1 man dead, stabbed during struggle over a wooden fence. The surviving farmer was tried by community consensus and hung from a tree at Sentinel Hill. Justice administered without formal legal system, because no formal legal system exists in Westfall any longer. The militia system that theoretically protects the region is inadequate by design. The People's Militia consists of farmers who agree to respond when threats emerge, leaving their own farms to defend others' farms, risking their lives against enemies who are better armed and better trained. Service is mandatory for men between 16 and 50. Monthly musters at Sentinel Hill provide basic training, formation marching, coordinated defense tactics, practice with weapons that most farmers barely know how to use. Brian Stoutmantle, the militia commander, does his best with resources that are laughably insufficient. He cannot train farmers into soldiers in a few hours monthly. He cannot equip them properly. He cannot be present everywhere that threats emerge. When the bell rings at Sentinel Hill, signaling attack, or Defier sighting or null raid, farmers are expected to drop their tools and respond immediately. The response time varies based on distance and current activity. Farmers working in fields close to their homes can respond in minutes. Farmers working distant fields take longer. By the time sufficient force gathers to address the threat, the raiders have often completed their attack and fled. The militia arrives to find burned cottages, murdered families, stolen goods already gone. They pursue when possible, but rarely catch raiders who know the terrain and have planned escape routes. The militia's primary value is not preventing attacks, but occasionally punishing attackers, killing enough defiers or gnolls that the survivors think twice before returning. Gareth has served in the militia for 18 years, since he turned 16 and became eligible for service. He has responded to perhaps 40 calls during those years. He has participated in combat 6 times, fighting against defiers twice and gnolls 4 times. He has killed 3 men, all defiers, and participated in the killing of perhaps a dozen gnolls during pack confrontations. He does not speak of these killings. They were necessary. They were defense of community. But taking human life leaves psychological marks that do not fade. The faces of the men he killed remain clear in memory. He wonders sometimes whether they had families, whether children somewhere mourn fathers who will never return. Then he remembers that these men chose to join the defiers, chose to raid farms, chose to murder and steal. His sympathy diminishes but does not disappear entirely. Living with constant fear changes people in ways that are difficult to articulate. The fear never disappears. It lessens during peaceful periods but remains present. Background anxiety that colors every moment. Gareth checks the perimeter every morning, not from habit, but from genuine concern that threats approach during night. He bars the door every evening, not as ritual, but as critical defense measure. He wakes at sounds during night, heart racing, sword hand reaching for weapon before conscious mind fully engages. This hypervigilance is exhausting. It prevents restful sleep. It makes relaxation impossible. But it also keeps the family alive. The farmers who relax, who allow routines to become complacent, who trust that danger will not find them. These are the farmers who die when danger inevitably arrives. The children grow up with fear as foundation of their worldview. Thomas has never known a time when the cottage was safe. His earliest memories include his father checking for threats, his mother telling him to hide when strangers approach. He is learning to be hard, to suppress fear and continue functioning, to accept that he might die young and that his purpose is to work until death arrives. Sarah is younger and still retains some innocence, but that innocence is eroding. She has nightmares about monsters that break through the door. She asks questions about what happens if bad men come, questions that Ilara answers honestly because lying would leave Sarah unprepared. By age 7, she already understands that the world wants to hurt her, and that only vigilance and luck keep that hurt at bay. Why stay in Westfall when staying is so dangerous? The question implies alternatives exist. Gareth could abandon the cottage, travel to Stormwind, seek work as laborer in the city. But cities are overcrowded with refugees who already fill every available job. A farmer has no skills that cities value. He would compete for day labor against hundreds of others equally desperate, probably failing to earn enough for family survival. He could migrate to Elwyn Forest or Redridge, attempt to start over in regions that might be slightly more stable. But those regions also suffer threats. Perhaps different threats, but threats nonetheless. Nowhere in human territories offers safety that Westfall cannot match. The land itself holds Gareth here. This land was cleared by his great-grandfather, worked by his grandfather, defended by his father. The cottage was built by men whose hands he held as child. Leaving means abandoning that continuity, declaring that the work of 4 generations was meaningless. It means his father's death defending this farm served no purpose. It means the family history ends. The millstone name disappears from Westfall. The connection to place and past severs completely. For a peasant who owns nothing else, land and history are wealth beyond material measure. Surrendering them feels like surrendering identity itself. There is also hope, irrational perhaps, but real. Hope that Stormwind will eventually restore order to Westfall. Hope that the Defiers will be defeated or will negotiate peace. Hope that next year's harvest will be good enough to build surplus that provides security. Hope that the children will survive to adulthood and have children of their own who continue the family line. This hope is tested constantly by reality that shows little evidence of improvement. But humans persist through hope more than through reason. The capacity to believe that circumstances can improve, despite evidence suggesting they will not, is what allows families to continue in situations that rational analysis would declare impossible. Tonight, the cottage stands under threat from multiple directions. The Defiers have marked it for future raid. Gnolls might descend from the hills any night they feel hungry enough. Murlocs could emerge from the stream. Bandits could pass through, looking for easy targets. Fire could start from cooking accident. Disease could strike any family member. Any of dozens of threats could manifest in the next hour, tomorrow, next week. The timing unpredictable, but the eventual arrival nearly certain. Gareth bars the door as he does every night, knowing the bar will slow attackers, but not stop them. He places his sword within reach, knowing it provides minimal defense against superior numbers. He lies next to Ilara and tries to sleep, knowing he will wake multiple times to investigate sounds that are probably harmless, but might not be. This is home in Westfall. This is the average dwelling in a world that offers peasants no protection and minimal mercy. And somehow, despite everything, families continue. The cottage exists within a web of relationships that extends to neighboring farms and the broader Westfall community. Isolation is both physical and social reality, but complete isolation means death. Survival requires cooperation even when cooperation is difficult, even when scarcity breeds competition and suspicion. The nearest families represent the first layer of this social web. To the north, 200 yards distant, live the Broxtons, Darek and his wife Helena, their 4 children ranging from age 5 to 14. To the east, 300 yards across fallow field, live the Carpenters, an older couple whose children have grown and left for uncertain fates. To the south, a quarter-mile away, live the Hendersons, Marcus and Martha, their new infant, and Martha's elderly father who contributes what labor he still can. These families form a mutual survival network that functions through unwritten agreements and reciprocal obligation. When Gareth needs help moving large stones from his field, Darek comes with his sons to provide labor. When Darek's roof needs rethatching, Gareth spends 3 days assisting with work that cannot be done alone. The labor is not paid in coin, but in understanding that future assistance will be provided when needed. This system works because all parties recognize that refusing to help neighbors means being refused help when your own crisis arrives. The cooperation is not altruistic but pragmatic, mutual insurance against disasters that individuals cannot handle alone. The well that serves all 4 families represents the most critical shared resource. The agreement governing its use was established when the well was dug 17 years ago. Each family contributes equally to maintenance. When the well needs repairs, all 4 families provide labor and materials proportionally. Water usage is theoretically unlimited during normal conditions, but during drought years an informal rationing system takes effect. Each family reduces consumption voluntarily, monitoring neighbors to ensure fairness. 3 years ago, when Marcus Henderson was caught drawing water during night hours beyond his agreed ration, the confrontation nearly destroyed the cooperation network. Darek Broxton mediated a resolution that included Henderson apologizing publicly and paying reparations in the form of labor on others' farms. The incident was resolved, but trust was damaged, creating tension that persists today. Women maintain social bonds that differ from but complement the male relationships centered on labor exchange. Ilara sees Helena Broxton perhaps twice weekly, conversations at the well, or brief visits when one needs to borrow a tool or ingredient. These conversations cover household management, child rearing, food preservation techniques, herbal remedies for common ailments. The women share knowledge that men rarely possess: how to treat fever in infants, which herbs induce menstruation when pregnancy is unwanted, how to manage miscarriage without medical assistance. This knowledge passes between women in quiet exchanges, rarely discussed with husbands, understood as female sphere of expertise that men need not concern themselves with. The division between male and female spheres is absolute and unquestioned. Men work fields, maintain tools, perform militia service, represent the family in official dealings with authorities and merchants. Women manage households, prepare food, raise young children, maintain the vegetable gardens, handle textile production when families have wool to process. These divisions are not negotiable or flexible. A man who performs household tasks risks mockery from other men. A woman who attempts field work intrudes on male domain and faces social sanction. The rigidity of these roles is necessary because survival depends on each person performing their assigned function efficiently. Experimentation with different arrangements wastes time and risks failure in tasks that must be performed correctly. Gareth's world extends as far as Sentinel Hill and occasionally to market towns beyond. He interacts with other men through militia service, through labor exchanges, through transactions at market. He knows the names of perhaps 50 men in the surrounding area, can identify their farms, understands their reputations. His relationships with these men are cordial, but not intimate. Conversations focus on practical matters: crop yields, threats observed, prices at market, militia news. Emotions are rarely discussed. Personal problems remain private. This emotional restraint is not coldness, but adaptation to a world where vulnerability can be exploited and where men are expected to endure without complaint. Ilara's world is geographically smaller, but socially richer. She knows perhaps 20 women within walking distance, understands their family situations in detail, maintains relationships through regular contact. She knows which women can be trusted with secrets, which women gossip destructively, which women offer genuine help during crises. When Martha Henderson gave birth to her recent child, Ilara spent 2 days at the Henderson cottage, assisting with the birth, caring for the newborn, preparing food for the family. This assistance was given freely with expectation that Martha or another woman will reciprocate when Ilara faces her own crisis. Women's mutual aid networks function more smoothly than male cooperation because women practice these exchanges constantly, rather than only during major events. Family structure in Westfall follows traditional human patterns, modified by high mortality and economic pressure. The nuclear family of parents and children is standard, but death claims family members with such frequency that incomplete families are common. Widows and widowers remarry quickly because single adults cannot manage farm and household tasks simultaneously. Children whose parents die are absorbed into extended family or neighboring families, informal adoption that provides care while adding labor to the adopting household. The Carpenter family to the east raised a nephew after his parents died in Defias raid, treating him as their own son, though everyone knows his origin story. Gareth's parents are both dead, his father killed by Defias 7 years ago, his mother succumbing to fever the following winter. The connection between these deaths is understood, if not proven. His mother's will to live diminished after her husband's murder, and illnesses take those who have surrendered hope more readily than they take those who fight to survive. Gareth inherited the cottage and the land by default, being the only surviving son. His older brother disappeared during the Second War, presumed dead though no confirmation ever arrived. His younger sister married a farmer in Duskwood and has not been heard from in 5 years. Whether she lives or has died in that troubled region remains unknown. Ilara's losses match Gareth's. Her parents lived in Moonbrook when that town fell to Defire's control 8 years ago. They were killed during the initial uprising when Van Cleef's forces seized the town, executed those who resisted, and drove out everyone else. Ilara's 2 brothers took different paths after Moonbrook fell. One joined the militia and was killed fighting Defier 6 years ago. The other, desperate and angry, joined the Defiers himself, choosing the very organization that murdered his parents. This betrayal is family shame that Ilara does not speak about. To have a brother among the bandits who terrorize Westfall makes Ilara suspect in some neighbors' eyes, though she bears no responsibility for her brother's choices. The children represent both hope for future and constant source of anxiety. Thomas, at 12 years old, is already considered nearly adult, expected to perform full day's work, treated as young man rather than child. His childhood effectively ended at age 10 when he became strong enough for serious farm labor. He will inherit the cottage and land if he survives to inherit anything. His future wife will join him here, bringing whatever small dowry her family can provide, beginning the cycle again with new generation. But his survival to adulthood is not assured. Disease, accident, violence, or military conscription could end his life before he reaches 20. Gareth and Ilara do not speak of this possibility, but plan around it, teaching Thomas everything he needs to know to manage the farm, ensuring he can continue if they die. Sarah, at 7 years old, remains in the transitional space between childhood and adult responsibilities. She helps her mother with household tasks, learning skills she will need when she marries. She will not inherit property because inheritance follows male lines, but she will bring knowledge of household management to whatever family she joins through marriage. Her education is entirely practical. She will never learn to read or write. These skills serve no function in a life that will consist of cooking, cleaning, bearing children, and working until her body fails. Reading is for nobles and priests. Writing is for merchants and government officials. Peasant children need neither. The family's earlier daughter exists as absence rather than presence. She was born between Thomas and Sarah, lived 3 years, died of fever that the family could not treat. She was buried behind the cottage in ground that receives occasional flowers from Ilara. Her name was Anna, and she is remembered in evening prayers, but rarely discussed otherwise. Dwelling on the dead serves no purpose when the living require constant attention. The loss shaped both parents in ways they do not articulate. Ilara holds Sarah closer than she held Anna, terrified of losing another daughter. Gareth works harder to provide surplus that might purchase medicine if another child falls ill, though he knows that no amount of money can save children from many diseases that kill them. Marriage in Westfall is practical arrangement more than romantic union. Gareth and Ilara's marriage was arranged by their parents when Gareth was 19 and Ilara 17. The arrangement made sense economically and socially. Gareth needed wife to manage household while he worked fields. Ilara needed husband to provide land and protection. Their families approved the match. A priest performed the ceremony at Sentinel Hill. They began living together in this cottage, strangers learning to function as partners. Love developed over years rather than preceding marriage. They care for each other genuinely now, but the care is demonstrated through actions rather than words. Gareth provides food and protection. Ilara manages the home and raises children. This division of labor is their primary form of expressing commitment. Divorce does not exist as option in any practical sense. The Church of the Holy Light teaches that marriage is permanent union that only death dissolves. Even if religious prohibition did not exist, the economic reality would prevent separation. A divorced woman has no means of supporting herself. A divorced man cannot manage household and fieldwork simultaneously. The marriage must continue regardless of whether the partners remain compatible or affectionate. Some marriages are happier than others. Some couples develop genuine friendship and mutual respect. Others endure decades of resentment and conflict. But all continue because continuation is the only option. The Church of the Holy Light provides Westfall's primary religious and moral framework. The light is worshipped as divine force that protects the faithful, that demands moral behavior, that promises afterlife reward for those who serve properly. The theology is not complex or especially consistent, adapted by local priests to address the needs of illiterate peasant congregations. The central teachings emphasize duty, obedience to legitimate authority, acceptance of suffering as test of faith, and hope for better existence after death. These teachings serve to make the current life's hardships more bearable by contextualizing them within larger divine plan. Brother Malthus serves as traveling priest for this region of Westfall. He is perhaps 50 years old, gaunt from years of inadequate nutrition, gray-haired and tired-eyed from witnessing suffering he cannot alleviate. He travels a circuit that covers approximately 30 farms, spending a few days at each location, conducting services, performing marriages and baptisms, blessing weapons and fields, providing what spiritual comfort he can offer. His visits to the Millstone Cottage occur perhaps 6 times yearly, irregular schedule depending on weather and threats. When he comes, the family attends his service, receiving communion if Malthus has bread and wine available, confessing sins that are rarely dramatic but weigh on conscience nonetheless. Malthus's sermons address practical morality applicable to peasant existence. Do not steal from neighbors. Help those in need when possible. Accept hardship without losing faith. Trust that the light protects those who serve faithfully. The sermons avoid complex theology that would confuse his audience. They provide reassurance more than instruction. Malthus knows his congregants suffer constantly. He knows they need hope more than doctrine. He provides what hope he can while privately doubting whether the light pays any attention to Westfall's tribulations. His own faith is tested by years of watching good people die while the wicked prosper. But he continues his circuit because someone must bring religious services to isolated farms, and no one else volunteers for this difficult ministry. The cottage contains a small shrine on shelf mounted against the southern wall. The shrine holds white candle and simple wooden symbol carved in the light's traditional shape. The family lights the candle during morning and evening prayers, brief rituals that structure the day's beginning and end. Morning prayer asks for protection during the coming day, for good weather, for safety from threats, for success in work. Evening prayer thanks the light for another day survived, for food consumed, for families' continued existence. The prayers are formulaic, repeated words that Gareth learned from his father, who learned them from his father. The prayers provide psychological comfort, small sense of control over circumstances that are largely uncontrollable. The candles used at the shrine cost approximately 1 silver coin for pack of 12, each candle lasting perhaps 20 hours of burning. The family uses approximately 18 candles yearly for religious purposes, expense that competes with other needs but is considered necessary. Failing to maintain the shrine would be noticed by neighbors and would raise questions about the family's faith and moral character. Social pressure enforces religious observance as much as personal belief. Being seen as insufficiently faithful damages reputation and reduces willingness of others to cooperate during crises. Westfall's social hierarchy has collapsed from its traditional structure. Before the Defias uprising, the region was governed by nobility, who maintained estates, collected taxes, administered justice, and theoretically protected peasant farmers who worked the land. These nobles fled or were killed when Van Cleef's forces seized control of substantial territory. The old hierarchy is gone, replaced by informal structure based on practical power rather than hereditary right. Gryan Stoutmantle commands the people's militia and functions as closest thing to authority figure that remains. His power derives from willingness of farmers to follow his leadership, not from any official appointment. Merchants occupy important position in current social structure because they control trade and credit. The merchants who travel from Stormwind to purchase grain and sell necessities determine prices, extend loans, and effectively decide which farms survive and which fail. Their economic power is resented but cannot be challenged by individual farmers who lack alternatives. The merchants exploit this monopoly position, offering low prices for grain while charging high prices for salt, tools, and other necessities. They justify these margins by citing risks of traveling through bandit-infested territory, and the justification has some validity even if the prices remain exploitative. Landholding farmers like Gareth occupy middle tier of the social hierarchy. They own property, produce food, and maintain some independence even while struggling constantly. They are not wealthy by any standard, but are better positioned than tenant farmers who work others' land for portion of harvest, or landless laborers who work for daily wages. The gap between landowner and tenant is small in material terms, but significant psychologically. Ownership provides dignity that tenancy lacks. Losing land means descending social ladder permanently, joining ranks of those who will never escape poverty. Refugees occupy lowest tier, arriving continuously from regions that have suffered even worse catastrophes than Westfall. They come from Duskwood, where undead and Worgen have made agriculture impossible. They come from Redridge, where Blackrock orcs raid constantly. They come from the north, where the Scourge has destroyed entire kingdoms. These refugees have nothing: no land, no tools, no connections to community. They beg for food, offer labor for minimal compensation, sometimes turn to theft when desperation becomes overwhelming. The established farmers view refugees with mixture of sympathy and resentment. Sympathy because their suffering is obvious and real. Resentment because they strain resources that are already inadequate for existing population. Interaction with official authority is rare and usually unwelcome. Stormwind's government maintains minimal presence in Westfall. Tax collectors arrive each autumn with armed escorts, taking the 15% tithe regardless of harvest quality or family need. They are not interested in explanations or appeals. They assess what is owed, collect it, depart. Resistance results in confiscation of property and possible execution. No one resists after seeing what happens to those who try. The kingdom provides nothing in exchange for these taxes. No soldiers patrol Westfall's roads. No officials mediate disputes. No aid arrives during crises. The relationship is purely extractive. Market Day at Sentinel Hill occurs monthly when conditions permit safe travel. The market gathers farmers from surrounding area, traveling merchants from Stormwind, and occasional adventurers passing through. For Gareth's family, Market Day represents rare break from routine and essential opportunity for trade. The journey begins before dawn. Gareth loading surplus grain into small cart. Ilara packing food for the journey. Children excited by prospect of seeing other people, and perhaps witnessing small luxuries that markets occasionally provide. The walk to Sentinel Hill takes 2 hours, following roads that are sometimes patrolled by militia, but often left unguarded. The market itself is a chaotic assembly of merchants displaying wares, farmers negotiating prices, children running between stalls, occasional soldiers or adventurers seeking supplies. The atmosphere is simultaneously festive and tense. People enjoy social interaction rare in their isolated existence, but everyone understands that the market attracts criminals who prey on travelers carrying goods and coins. Gareth keeps his sword visible and his family close. He conducts his business quickly, selling grain to merchant who offers 3 silver coins for £40, price that is lower than Gareth hoped, but better than starving. He purchases salt at extortionate price, evaluates tools he cannot afford, trades vegetables for eggs with neighboring farmer. Ilara's market experience differs from Gareth's. While he handles commercial transactions, she visits with other women, exchanging news and information that flows through female networks. She learns that a woman 3 farms over is pregnant again, despite having 6 children already. She hears that another woman lost child to fever last month. She trades recipes for food preservation and herbal remedies. She arranges potential marriage prospect for Thomas, speaking with mother of girl who will be eligible for marriage in 3 years. These conversations happen quickly, women stealing moments between their own errands, maintaining relationships that provide support network critical for survival. The children experience market as entertainment. They see merchants from distant cities. They smell exotic spices they will never taste. They watch adventurers in armor that gleams with enchantments. They hear stories of battles against dragons and demons, tales that seem fantastical, but which the adventurers swear are true. For a few hours, Thomas and Sarah inhabit a world larger than their 3-acre farm, glimpsing possibilities that will never be available to them, but which provide imaginative escape from grinding reality of their actual lives. Community rituals mark the year's passage and provide social cohesion. Harvest festival occurs in late autumn after crops are gathered. Celebration that acknowledges another year survived and work completed. The festival is held at Sentinel Hill. Multiple families gathering to share food, drink weak ale, tell stories, allow children to play together. The atmosphere is cautiously joyful. People know that winter hardships approach, but for one evening they set aside worry and mark the moment when survival for another year becomes probable, rather than uncertain. Musicians play fiddles and drums, couples dance, old men tell exaggerated stories of their youth. The celebration ends early because farmers cannot afford to waste lamp oil or stay awake late when morning work begins, regardless of fatigue. Funerals are common and follow similar pattern regardless of deceased's age or status. The body is washed and wrapped in cloth, buried within 1 day of death to prevent decomposition in warm weather. Brother Malthus performs service if he is available, but often families must conduct their own burial rituals, reading passages from memory, praying for deceased soul, marking grave with wooden cross. Attendance at funerals is expected from neighboring families, demonstration of community solidarity in face of loss that affects everyone. The mourning is genuine but brief. Crops do not stop growing because someone died. Work continues immediately after burial, practical necessity overriding emotional need for extended grief. Weddings are rare and joyful, occasions for community celebration that contrast sharply with funeral solemnity. When a marriage is arranged, both families contribute what they can to wedding feast. Neighboring families bring food and drink, pooling resources to create meal more substantial than any single family could provide. The ceremony itself is brief, religious blessing followed by communal eating and drinking. The celebration has pragmatic purpose beyond joy. It announces the union to community, establishes witnesses who can confirm the marriage's legitimacy, and creates social obligation for community to support the new family during difficulties. Oral tradition preserves history and knowledge in society where literacy is rare. Elders tell stories of the past, of wars fought and disasters survived, of how things were before the current troubles began. They describe Westfall as it existed before the Defias uprising, when nobility maintained order and merchants traveled roads safely. They speak of the First War against the Orcs, of Stormwind's fall and subsequent rebuilding, of the Second War when the Alliance formed and defeated Horde. These stories establish context for current suffering, demonstrating that hardship is not new and that humans have survived worse. They also serve as warning against complacency, reminding listeners that circumstances can always deteriorate further. Children's education occurs through these stories and through direct instruction in practical skills. Thomas learns farming by working alongside his father, absorbing knowledge through observation and correction. Sarah learns household management from her mother, watching how tasks are performed and then performing them herself under supervision. Moral instruction comes through cautionary tales about people who made bad choices and suffered consequences. The story of the farmer who stole from his neighbor and was caught, who lost community support and eventually lost his land. The story of the girl who ran away with traveling merchant, who was abandoned in distant city and never heard from again. These stories teach that community norms must be followed and that deviation results in disaster. Isolation and community exist in tension. Each family is physically separated, self-sufficient in daily operations, capable of surviving independently for extended periods. But complete independence is impossible. Shared wells require cooperation. Defense against raids requires mutual response. Harvest work sometimes demands more labor than single family can provide. The community exists as a loose network of independent units that cooperate when necessary while maintaining boundaries and protecting individual interests. This balance works most of the time but fails during extreme stress when competition for scarce resources overcomes collaborative impulse. Westfall's deteriorating conditions test community bonds constantly. As refugees increase, as Defias raids intensify, as food becomes scarcer, the willingness to help neighbors diminishes. Families hoard resources that they might previously have shared. Disputes escalate into violence more readily. Some farmers join the Defias, choosing survival within criminal organization over death, defending indefensible position. The social fabric frays, becoming threadbare but not yet tearing completely. Whether it can hold through further deterioration remains uncertain. Strangers are viewed with suspicion that is entirely rational given current threats. Anyone approaching the cottage could be Defias scout, criminal looking for opportunities, refugee seeking handout the family cannot afford. Gareth challenges strangers from distance, sword in hand, demanding they state their business before approaching. Most strangers are harmless, travelers seeking directions, merchants looking for farms to trade with, occasionally soldiers passing through. But enough strangers prove dangerous that caution is mandatory. The burden of proof lies with stranger to demonstrate peaceful intent, not with resident to demonstrate hospitality. This is community in Westfall. Fragile, web of relationships strained by poverty and threat, holding together through combination of necessity and tradition. The relationships are not warm or deeply trusting. They are pragmatic arrangements that serve survival needs. But they are real, and they matter. When disaster strikes, neighbors help each other because they know they will need that help reciprocated. When someone dies, others attend the funeral because they expect others to attend their own funerals. When children are born, community celebrates because more hands mean better survival odds for everyone. This is not idealized community of mutual affection. This is practical community of mutual need, and in a world where everything is scarce and nothing is guaranteed. Mutual need creates bonds strong enough to keep people connected, even when connection is difficult and trust is limited. War is the context within which every Westfall farmer's life unfolds, not as direct participation, but as inescapable background condition that shapes possibilities and determines fates. The wars that have consumed human kingdoms during the past 40 years are not abstract historical events, but immediate realities that have killed family members, destroyed communities, and created the chaos that now defines daily existence. Gareth's grandfather fought in the First War, the initial conflict between humans and the Orcish horde that emerged from the Dark Portal. He died during Stormwind's fall, killed defending the city when it was overrun by forces that humanity had never encountered before. His body was never recovered. His grave exists only as names spoken in evening prayers. Man who died fighting enemies whose existence no one had anticipated. The First War devastated Stormwind and scattered its population as refugees throughout human territories. Gareth's father was child during this period, fleeing north with his mother and siblings, living in temporary camps, surviving on charity and stolen food. The trauma of that flight shaped his father's entire life, creating permanent anxiety about security and food supply that he transmitted to Gareth through constant warnings about preparedness and distrust of stability. When Stormwind was rebuilt after the Second War, Gareth's father returned to Westfall and reclaimed family land that had gone fallow during his absence. He rebuilt the cottage, married, started family, attempted to restore normalcy. But the fear never left him. He died still afraid, killed by the Defias in his own home, proving that his anxiety had been justified. The Second War followed years later when the Horde returned with greater numbers and broader ambitions. The alliance of human kingdoms, dwarves and high elves formed to resist this second invasion. The war consumed the northern territories. Battles fought across Lordaeron and Kars Modan, massive armies clashing while Westfall remained relatively untouched by direct combat. But Westfall provided soldiers for these distant battles. Gareth's older brother was conscripted, taken at age 19, sent north with militia from across Stormwind's territories. The family received one letter during his 2 years of service. Brief note dictated to military scribe reporting that he was alive and fighting near Tyr's hand. Then silence. No further letters. No word of his death. Simply absence that hardened from temporary to permanent as years passed without communication. The Third War brought the scourge, undead plague that destroyed Lordaeron's kingdom, killed or transformed most of its population, created undead armies that devastated northern territories. Westfall was spared direct scourge invasion, geographic distance providing protection that military force could not guarantee. But Westfall received refugees from the north, people fleeing the undead, carrying stories of loved ones transformed into mindless corpses, of entire cities falling in days, of plague that killed and then reanimated victims as soldiers serving the Lich King. These stories seemed fantastical initially, too horrific to be fully credited. But the refugees kept coming, thousands and then tens of thousands, providing consistent testimony that something unprecedented and catastrophic had occurred in Lordaeron. Between and after these major conflicts, smaller wars continued constantly. Border skirmishes with Blackrock orcs, naval battles with Naga along coasts, incursions by various enemy forces taking advantage of human weakness. The professional armies of Stormwind fought these battles while peasants provided food, supplies, and occasionally replacement soldiers when casualties reduced unit strength below functional levels. The peasants were not consulted about whether these wars should be fought. They were simply required to support whatever conflicts the kingdom determined necessary. Their sons were taken. Their harvests were taxed. Their farms became battlegrounds when fighting reached Westfall's borders. Gareth's personal losses extend beyond distant ancestors to recent years and immediate family. His father's death 7 years ago remains vivid in memory, not fading with time, but simply becoming familiar pain that Gareth has learned to carry. His father was 53 years old when the Defias came, too old for militia service but still strong enough to defend his home. He fought the raiders with the same militia sword that Gareth now carries. He wounded 2 of them before they overwhelmed him, beating him with clubs until he stopped moving. Gareth found his father's body the next morning, having been away from the cottage during the raid. The image of his father's broken face, the blood soaked into the earthen floor, the empty grain storage where the raiders had taken winter supplies. These memories replay during quiet moments when Gareth's mind is not fully occupied with work. His mother survived the physical violence, but not the aftermath. She was present during the raid, hiding with Ilara and the children, listening to her husband being murdered. She lived through winter on reduced rations, accepting charity from neighbors, maintaining the cottage without her husband's labor. But something broke inside her. She stopped speaking much. She stopped eating adequately even when food was available. When fever came the following winter, she did not fight it. She died within 3 days, her body surrendering to illness that others survived. Gareth believes she chose to die, though he never speaks this belief aloud. Her grave lies next to his father's behind the cottage, 2 wooden crosses marking soil that contains the people who raised him. Ilara's losses mirror and perhaps exceed Gareth's. Her parents died during Moonbrook's fall to the Defias 8 years ago, killed in the initial violence when Van Cleef's forces seized the town. Moonbrook had been modest but stable community, miners and merchants supporting the local gold extraction that once made Westfall prosperous. When the Defias claimed the mines, they killed anyone who resisted and drove out those who did not actively join their cause. Ilara's father attempted to organize defense, gathering men to resist the occupation. The Defias made example of him, hanging him in town square where his body remained for 3 days, before Ilara's mother was permitted to take it down for burial. Her mother survived only months longer before grief and pneumonia killed her. Ilara's 2 brothers responded to their parents' murder in opposite ways. The older brother, Marcus, joined the People's Militia, dedicating himself to fighting the Defias and preventing other families from suffering what his family had endured. He survived 2 years of constant combat, participating in raids on Defias camps, defending farms under attack, gradually becoming hardened fighter skilled in violence. Then he died in ambush, caught with 5 other militia members by larger Defias force, killed before reinforcements could arrive. Her younger brother Thomas chose different path. Angry at the kingdom that abandoned Westfall, desperate after seeing his parents murdered, he joined the Defias. He became one of the bandits who raid farms and murder farmers. Ilara has not seen him in 6 years and does not know whether he still lives. The children inherit this accumulated trauma without fully understanding its weight. Thomas was 7 years old when his grandfather was killed, old enough to remember the man who taught him to carve wood and told him stories of the old wars. He remembers his grandfather's laugh, his smell of pipe tobacco, his rough hands that were gentle when holding a child. He understood that something terrible had happened but could not comprehend the permanence of death, expecting for months that his grandfather would return. Eventually, he stopped expecting this and accepted the absence. But the loss shaped his understanding of the world, teaching him that people can disappear suddenly and completely. Sarah has lived her entire life in the shadow of loss she is too young to fully process. She never knew her grandparents. Her sister Anna died when Sarah was infant, leaving no conscious memory but creating absence she senses without understanding. She sees her parents' grief in moments when they think she is not watching, sees her father standing at the grave behind the cottage, sees her mother holding Anna's old doll with expressions Sarah cannot interpret. She knows that the world takes people away, and that her parents fear the world will take her and Thomas too. The kingdom's neglect of Westfall is both cause and consequence of the suffering its residents endure. Stormwind's government maintains authority to tax and conscript, but provides no corresponding protection or services. The nobility who once governed Westfall fled when the Defias uprising made the region dangerous. No replacements were sent. The kingdom's military priorities lie elsewhere, defending against threats in the north, maintaining control of Elwyn Forest and territories immediately surrounding the capital. Westfall is peripheral region, agriculturally important but politically insignificant, allowed to collapse as long as some grain continues flowing to Stormwind's markets. This abandonment is not officially acknowledged. The king's proclamations speak of Stormwind's commitment to all its territories, promise that order will be restored, claim that temporary difficulties are being addressed. But proclamations do not translate to soldiers or supplies or any tangible assistance. The tax collectors come regularly, extracting their 15% with bureaucratic efficiency. But when farms are raided and farmers murdered, no soldiers arrive to pursue the raiders. The kingdom takes everything and gives nothing, relationship that has destroyed whatever loyalty the peasants once felt toward distant nobles who make decisions affecting their lives. Conscription represents particular horror that haunts every family with sons approaching military age. The kingdom maintains right to draft able-bodied men between 18 and 35 for military service. Conscription notices are delivered by soldiers who arrive unannounced, present official documents, and take young men regardless of family circumstances or agricultural needs. The men are transported to Stormwind for basic training, then deployed to wherever the kingdom needs bodies. Many never return. Some die in combat. Others desert and disappear. Some are wounded and sent home unable to work, becoming burdens their families struggle to support. Thomas will reach conscription age in 6 years. Gareth and Elara do not speak of this directly, but plan around it constantly. They attempt to arrange marriage for Thomas before he turns 18, hoping that wife and child might provide reason for deferment, though deferments are rarely granted. They teach him everything about farming, so that if they die before his conscription, he will be capable of managing the land. They try to prepare him psychologically for military service he will likely face. These conversations are inadequate preparation for combat's reality, but they are the only preparation parents can provide. The prospect of losing Thomas to military service terrifies Gareth and Elara in ways that external threats do not. Defier's raids can be prepared for, defended against, survived through vigilance and luck. Conscription is legal, inevitable, inescapable. When soldiers arrive with conscription notice, resistance means death for entire family. Thomas will be taken. He will likely die far from home in battle against enemies that have nothing to do with Westfall's problems. His death will serve kingdom's strategic objectives that provide no benefit to the family losing their son. The mental toll of constant threat and accumulated loss manifests differently in Gareth and Elara. Gareth's response is hypervigilance bordering on paranoia. He sleeps poorly, waking multiple times nightly to investigate sounds that are usually harmless. He checks the perimeter obsessively, looking for threats that rarely materialize but could appear at any moment. He trusts no one outside immediate family, viewing every stranger as potential attacker. His world has contracted to the cottage and fields, the family he protects, the work that sustains them. Elara's burden is maintaining family cohesion when Gareth retreats into grim silence. When he becomes dark and withdrawn, lost in memories of violence and grief, she provides stability that keeps household functioning. She comforts children frightened by their father's mood. She manages daily routines that create structure amidst chaos. She prays more fervently than Gareth, finding in faith something he has lost. Her strength is quiet and constant, unrecognized because it manifests in absence of crisis rather than dramatic intervention. The question of leaving Westfall arises periodically in both their minds, entertained briefly before being dismissed as impractical. Where would they go? Stormwind offers no opportunities for landless farmers. The city is overcrowded with refugees competing for inadequate work. Other regions are equally troubled. Duskwood is overrun. Redridge is contested, there is nowhere to go that promises improvement over staying. The land itself holds them through something deeper than economic calculation. This soil was cleared by Gareth's great-grandfather, worked by 3 generations before Gareth inherited responsibility. The cottage was built by hands that are buried behind it. Leaving means declaring that all previous generations' work was meaningless. For people who own nothing else, land and history are wealth beyond material measure. Yet meaning persists, despite everything that denies it. Small victories accumulate into reasons to continue. A good harvest provides sense of accomplishment. A day when no threats materialize allows brief relaxation. A moment when Sarah laughs at something Thomas says reminds that joy exists even in difficult circumstances. These moments are small and fleeting, easily overshadowed by suffering that dominates most hours. But they are real, and they matter. A warm meal becomes treasure. A night's sleep undisturbed by nightmares becomes luxury. Survival itself becomes purpose when no grander purposes remain accessible. The day ends as every day ends, with Gareth standing in the field at dusk, looking back toward the cottage that contains everything he has fought to preserve. The light fails gradually, grey sky darkening toward the black that will force him to abandon work and return to walls that offer minimal protection against threats that surround them. Smoke rises from the chimney where Ilara prepares the evening meal, thin column ascending into air that smells of approaching rain. The children are visible through the window as shadows moving in firelight, alive for another day, their continued existence the only victory that matters in a world where victories are measured in survival rather than triumph. The stone walls of the cottage stand as they have stood for 63 years, mortared by hands that are dust now, maintained by hands that will become dust in their turn. The thatched roof sheds water adequately despite the sections that need replacement. The door bars from inside, providing illusion of security that Gareth no longer fully believes but maintains, because the alternative is surrendering to despair that would make continuation impossible. This structure is not safe. It has never been safe, but it is home, defined not by the protection it offers, but by the people it shelters and the memories it contains. What is the average home in World of Warcraft? The question assumes that home is place, physical structure with specific characteristics that can be described and compared. But home in this world is not primarily about architecture or amenities. It is about what is endured within walls that witness suffering and continuation in equal measure. It is about soil that has absorbed the sweat of generations, graves that mark the cost of staying, fields that demand labor without guaranteeing reward. Home is the place where you work until exhaustion becomes familiar, where you fear the darkness every night but lie down anyway, where you bury your dead and teach your children to expect hardship as their inheritance. The cottage on this Westfall field is not unique. 3 miles in any direction stand similar structures housing similar families facing similar struggles. Throughout Westfall, throughout Elwyn Forest and Redridge and Duskwood and every human territory, peasant families occupy cottages that differ in details but share fundamental characteristics. Stone or wood walls, thatched or shingled roofs, single rooms or perhaps 2, earthen floors, hearth fires that never fully extinguish, beds that are adequate for sleeping but nothing more, possessions that number in dozens rather than hundreds, lives measured in survival rather than flourishing. This is not the home that appears in stories told by bards or in tales of heroes who save kingdoms. Those stories mention castles and manors, places where nobles make decisions that determine whether peasants live or die. The stories rarely acknowledge that beneath every grand narrative of war and heroism lies the mundane reality of farmers who grow food that feeds armies, who send sons to fight battles they do not understand, who die without recognition when their farms become battlegrounds. The average home is invisible to history, relevant only as source of resources that more important people require for more important purposes. But to the people who inhabit these invisible homes, to Gareth and Ilara and Thomas and Sarah, this cottage is the center of the world. It is the place they return to after work. It is the structure they defend when threats arrive. It is the space where children are born and raised, where parents grow old if they are fortunate enough to survive that long, where death comes eventually to everyone regardless of how carefully they have lived. The cottage is not comfortable or beautiful or impressive. It is simply necessary, the minimal shelter that makes human life possible in a world that provides no guarantees and minimal assistance. Gareth returns to the cottage as full darkness settles over Westfall. He bars the door behind him, checking that the beam is seated properly in its brackets, performing the ritual that marks transition from dangerous exterior to slightly less dangerous interior. He places his sword within reach of the bed, knowing he may need it before morning. He sits at the table with his family and eats stew that tastes like yesterday's stew and tomorrow's stew, food that is adequate for survival if not enjoyment. He participates in evening prayers that ask the light for protection that may or may not arrive. He lies down beside Ilara in the bed they have shared for 15 years, listening to the sounds of children breathing in the darkness. Tomorrow will bring the same work, the same threats, the same grinding struggle to extract survival from soil that gives reluctantly and from a world that takes eagerly. The routine will repeat with variations so minor they hardly matter. Weeds will be pulled, water will be carried, food will be prepared, threats will be watched for, sleep will come fitfully. The cycle continues not because it leads anywhere, but because stopping is not an option that living people can choose. To stop working is to starve. To stop defending is to die. To stop hoping is to surrender the last thing that makes the continuation bearable. And yet somewhere in Westfall tonight, in cottages scattered across fields and forests, other families mirror this scene. Other fathers check weapons and bar doors. Other mothers prepare meals from inadequate ingredients. Other children fall asleep without certainty they will wake to safety. Thousands of homes exist in this state, each one a site of quiet desperation and stubborn endurance, each one proof that humans can survive conditions that should break them, that continuation is possible even when thriving is not. The average home is not a place of rest or comfort. It is a place of work and vigilance and accumulated trauma passed from parents to children who will pass it to their children in turn. It is structure that stands between family and elements, between order and chaos, between continuation and extinction. Its value is not measured in luxury or beauty, but in the simple fact that it stands, that it provides minimal shelter, that it allows life to continue for one more day, and then another, until eventually the continuation ends as all things end. And in the morning, when thin light breaks over Westfall's fields and reveals whatever the darkness has brought or spared, Gareth Millstone will rise from his bed and unbar the door and step outside to begin another day. Because this is what it means to have a home in a world that burns, to have a place worth defending even when defense is nearly impossible, to continue working soil that generations have worked before you, knowing that your continuation serves no grand purpose beyond survival itself, and that survival, despite everything that argues against it, remains sufficient reason to continue.